Chapter 81. Furry Dutchy Buggy's high-pitched shriek, warped, almost comical, cut across the Oro Jackson's deck like a bolt of lightning. An elephant? An elephant walking in the sea? The crew exchanged baffled looks. Their first reaction was disbelief rather than fear. "Hey, Buggy hasn't started hallucinating from the fog, has he?" someone muttered. "He's never been right in the head," another snickered. "What did you say, Shanks?" Buggy roared back from the crow's nest, furious. The laughter on deck faltered, because not everyone found it funny. Kazuki Odin's face went stone white. He shot to the rail and peered hard into the thick gray fog, eyes fixed as if he could will the answer out of the mist. On the deck, Inuarashi and Nekomamushi, who had been playfully mingling with the crew, stilled at the same instant. Excitement lit their faces so suddenly it was almost painful. "It's Zo," Inuarashi's voice trembled. "No mistake about it." Nekomamushi's eyes went wide. "Our homeland. We're back." A booming, familiar laugh cut through the growing hush. "Ku-ha-ha-ha! It really is an elephant! How interesting!" Roger's voice rang out, confirming what the few who looked could scarcely believe. "How fascinating!" he cried, standing at the bow, eyes bright, more excited than if he'd just found buried treasure. Under Roger's steady gaze, a towering shape was already taking form through the thick fog. Then a sound cut through the mist. A low, primeval trumpet, like an elephant's call, rolled across the air. It wasn't loud, but it thrummed with a vitality that made the Oro Jackson shiver. The fog reacted as if startled, churning and pulling apart, and sunlight ripped through the clouds to once again flood the sea. Revealed before them was a creature beyond description, a colossal elephant. It was so vast it seemed to carry the world on its back. 4 pillar-like legs planted into the ocean floor, buried in seabed 10,000 meters down, while its enormous body rose into the clouds. On its broad back, the shapes of mountains, rivers, and forests could be made out as if a continent itself rested there. Each of its steps sent titanic waves sweeping over the water, storms in miniature trailing where it moved. The Oro Jackson looked no bigger than a leaf floating in a bathtub beside that living island. The sight made Shanks and Buggy cling to each other and howl, part terrified, part exhilarated, voices unlike anything they'd shown before. The rest of the crew stood frozen, staring. They had seen sea kings and enormous sea beasts, but this made the word creature feel inadequate. With each step of the elephant, the sea rolled and dipped. The Oro Jackson rode those undulations like a toy boat in a cradle, lifted and lowered rhythmically. The looming mass of the elephant leg pressed an oppressive presence into the air as the ship drew nearer. "Inuarashi and Nekomamushi are back!" Inuarashi bellowed from the bow, throwing his voice toward the kingdom on the elephant's back. His shout was carried farther than any ordinary yell, amplified by Kyle's sound waves, and soon answered. Zunesha reacted. The giant elephant curled its trunk and gently brought the Oro Jackson up onto its back. A handful of minks moved quickly across the beast's hide toward the ship, nimble as mountain goats. Leading them was a tall, imposing mink with curved horns and immaculate robes, the ruler of the Mokomo dukedom. He strode forward with all the dignity of a monarch and shouted in a voice that echoed across the vast hide. "Inuarashi!" At that name, Inuarashi's chest swelled. Nekomamushi, his longtime comrade, stepped up beside him, eyes blazing with loyalty and relief. The 2 old warriors let out a shout that was equal parts greeting and challenge, and the minks surged forward to meet them. The scene that followed was half battle cry, half homecoming. Minks leaped and danced, embracing the returning leaders. The once frozen crew watched the reunion unfold in stunned silence, the islanded kingdom large and living beneath their feet, the 2 exiled lords earned at last, and a giant elephant whose steps could carry whole nations across the sea. "Nekomamushi!" the king bellowed the moment he saw the 2 familiar figures. "You rascals, you're finally back!" He and a squad of mink guards sprang onto the deck, and in an instant the scene became a reunion of long-lost kin. The king greeted Inuarashi and Nekomamushi with heavy, affectionate blows, more the force of joy than punishment. "Where have you been all these years? I thought you were dead out there." "Your Majesty, it's a long story," Inuarashi said, rubbing the back of his head with a grin. "We met Odin-sama, and then—" His eyes flicked to Kazuki Odin. The king followed his gaze, When he saw the samurai's sword at his waist and that unmistakable topknot, his face went from curious to sober, then softened into respect. So he's a samurai of the Kozuki from Wano country. He bowed solemnly. Welcome to the Mokomo dukedom. Then the king let his eyes sweep over Roger, Rayleigh, Jabba, and the others. He could feel the powerful aura they could not hide, and his expression showed he understood. To win the loyalty of Inuarashi and Nekomamushi, and to be traveling with a Kozuki scion, these were no ordinary people. I am Goat Khan of the Mokomo dukedom, the Mink King announced, turning to Roger. Even though Roger looked like a carefree vagabond, his commanding presence could not be ignored. Welcome, everyone, to our country, the kingdom riding on Zunesha's back. Kuhaha! I am Gol D Roger, a pirate! Roger boomed back, offering his hand with his usual hearty grin. Thank you for your hospitality. At the king's invitation, the whole Roger Pirates crew came ashore on Zu. From the moment they set foot on the island, they were entranced by its singular customs and culture. The Mink were warm and open-hearted, brimming with curiosity about these outsiders, especially about Kozuki Odin and the human crew members they had only ever heard of. A little rabbit mink girl suddenly dashed forward and buried herself in Shanks's arms, pressing her soft cheek against his. Garachu, she squealed. Shanks blinked in surprise and laughed. Wow, so soft. Nearby, Buggy stamped his foot in petty jealousy. Damn it, why wasn't it me? He grumbled. GoatCon hosted a grand banquet for everyone in the giant whale forest that evening. Seated around the roaring hearths, Inuarashi and Nekomamushi vividly recounted their adventures, following Odin out to sea, the trials they faced, and how they had eventually come to sail with the Roger Pirates. Their stories held the room in rapt attention, weaving the Mink's past with the legends of the sea. The Mink tribe listened raptly, their reactions ranging from soft gasps to cheers. After several rounds of sake and the conversation settled, Roger spoke plainly. Your Majesty, we've come for the poneglyph. We heard there's a red road poneglyph on this island. At the word poneglyph, the king's face grew serious. He fell silent for a moment, then inclined his head. Yes, that stone has been protected by our tribe for generations. Since you are guests brought by Kozuki-sama, we have no reason to refuse you. He rose and personally led Roger, Rayleigh, and Kozuki Odin into the heart of the whale tree. Kyle and Jabba stayed behind with the others to continue the banquet. Inside the tree was a vast hollow. In its center stood a vivid red, cube-shaped megalith covered in ancient script, radiating a deep, mysterious presence. The fourth road poneglyph. Finally, it's all come together. Roger breathed, staring at the red stone with an intensity none had seen before. He reached toward it as if he could already trace the outline of the final island. Kozuki Odin, equally thrilled, stepped forward immediately and began to study the carved characters. Just then, Odin froze. He had spotted a familiar emblem carved on the wall beside the stone tablet. This is our Kozuki family crest, he cried. The king stepped forward, a proud smile on his face. That's right. Since ancient times, the Kozuki AF and our Mink tribe have been brothers. This crest is proof of our alliance. The legend was true. Odin's heart swelled. The forgotten history his father had spoken of was being confirmed in that moment. After Odin had copied the last road poneglyph and compared it with the rubbings from the other three, the map finally resolved into a single, precise coordinate. The intersection of all 4 points, the fabled final island, was no longer a distant myth. Set sail! Roger shouted, holding the 4 rubbings aloft. His voice rang through the vast hollows of the whale tree, filled with fierce, unshakable resolve. My lads, we'll feast tonight, and then we sail to find the world's last treasure. Oh, the crew's roar of approval was thunderous, so loud it seemed to shake the colossal Zunsha itself. Chapter 82. Laosha vs. Xiaobakai Alabasta Kingdom, the desert capital Alubarna. The sun hung overhead like a blazing forge, turning the golden dunes into a shimmer of heat and rolling mirages. Far below that burning sky, however, a cool underworld thrummed, an underground casino insulated from the desert and alive with a different kind of fire. Smoke curled through the low ceiling. Voices rose and fell in a chaotic chorus. Gamblers shouted and laughed, the sharp clink of coins stitched through it all like a metallic heartbeat. In the innermost, most luxurious room, the atmosphere was the opposite of the casino's raucous energy. Still, heavy, and suffused with tension. A tall man stood with his back to the door, looking out over the gambling floor through a floor-to-ceiling window. He wore an extravagant black fur coat, a ridiculous thing for Alabasta's climate, yet not a bead of sweat marred his skin. A golden cross earring dangled from his left ear. A cigar sat between his lips, smoke lifted and softened the hard angles of his youthful, ruthless face. He occupied the room like royalty, or something close to it. He was the new king of this underworld, Crocodile. "Boss," a trusted subordinate murmured as he pushed the door open a crack, his hand shaking. His voice trembled with something like fear. "That guy! He's here again!" Crocodile didn't turn. He plucked the cigar from his lips and let out a slow, thick plume of smoke. "Tell him to get lost," he said in a low, hoarse voice that brooked no argument. The subordinate's words trembled on the verge of tears. "We told him, but he wouldn't listen. He even hurt several of our men." At last Crocodile turned, impatience and a cold cruelty flashing in his hawk-like eyes. "Useless trash," he murmured. He walked out. His leather shoes made no sound on the carpet, but the men who followed him felt as if the air itself had been squeezed tight around their chests. The casino hall, which had been loud not long before, was suddenly dead quiet. Gamblers had fled in panic, a gambling table lay in disarray, and casino guards were crumpled on the floor where they'd clearly been tossed aside. At the center of the hall stood a monstrous figure, a man like a living mountain, all coiled muscle and brutal presence. Douglas Bullet. He grinned, a bloodthirsty stretch of lips, his voice a grinding rumble like two huge stones scraping together. "Crocodile," he said, "your men are too weak." Crocodile closed the distance, stopped a few paces away, and inspected the uninvited guest with a calm, clinical gaze. "I'll say this one last time. I'm not interested in fighting a mad dog. Get out of my territory." "Mad dog?" Bullet's grin widened until it looked savage. "That's right. I'm a mad dog who lives to fight strong opponents. And you, Crocodile, your name's been spread across this desert. They say you're the strongest here." "So what?" Crocodile's voice was laced with contempt. "Then prove it." Bullet answered with a roar. He slammed his massive boot into the stone floor, the impact spidering cracks through the hard rock, and launched himself forward like a living cannonball, all thrust and momentum. Crocodile didn't flinch or back away. He stepped forward instead, raised his right hand with fingers splayed and palm flat toward the charging giant. Beneath his feet, the ground began to shift, the solid floor dissolving into loose, dry sand. The yellow dust swirled up as if animated, coiling and rising until it formed a towering wall. "Sandstorm," Crocodile called. With a thunderous boom, Bullet's iron fist struck the sand wall. The barrier shattered on contact, and a billowing column of wind-driven sand exploded outward. Within seconds, the hall was filled with so much yellow grit that sight dropped to nothing, sand choking the air, turning the world into a swirling, blinding storm. "Is that all you've got?" Bullet's roar cut through the dust. A heartbeat later, a dark shape ripped through the sand curtain, fist aimed straight for Crocodile's face. Bullet had cloaked his hand in armament hockey, a black, iron-hard knuckle that gleamed menacingly even in the dim light. Crocodile's eyes narrowed. His body dissolved into a roaring cloud of sand and slipped aside, the solid blow passing through nothing but grit. "A logia. Interesting," Bullet muttered, only more excited by the miss. He flowed from the missed strike into a backhanded, whip-like kick that sliced a gust of wind across the battlefield. Crocodile reformed midair. The massive golden hook on his left hand flashed, meeting the sweeping kick with a precise parry. Metal rang against metal, a clear, sharp clang that spoke to the force behind the collision. The impact shoved Crocodile sliding backward, his momentum gouging two deep furrows into the ground. Crocodile steadied himself and flexed a slightly numb arm. "Not bad," he said, eyes cold. "Your strength, and your hockey too, impressive." Bullet drew his leg back, his expression burning with battle intent. "Come on," he taunted. "Don't hide like a coward. Show me your full power." "As you wish." Crocodile's eyes turned ice cold. He slammed his right hand into the floor and snarled, "Desert Spada." Sand erupted from the ground, coalescing into a massive blade several meters long along his arm. The sand blade whirled so fast it hummed, the spinning air cutting at the space around it. "Combine!" Bullet roared, refusing to be outdone. Gambling tables, Chunks of rubble and metal decorations were pulled toward him as if by an invisible gravity, crashing together and forming a brutally thick outer armor around his body. The effect was the work of his devil fruit, the clank-clank fruit. The two titans met again, one a razor of swirling sand, the other a hulking steel behemoth. Boom, boom. The underground casino shook under the impact, as if about to collapse. Each clash of sand and iron sent destructive shockwaves outward, shredding everything nearby. Walls split, heavy chunks fell from the ceiling, and the once luxurious hall was quickly reduced to rubble. The fight had raged from dusk into the dead of night and on until dawn. When the first pale ray of morning slipped through holes in the ruined walls, both men lay battered and gasping. Bullets' combined armor hung in tatters, exposing scarred flesh beneath. Crocodile's fur coat was equally shredded. New cuts streaked his face and blood ran down his cheek, yet he still clenched his cigar between his teeth, his eyes hard and unbowed. "Ha!" Bullet panted, chest heaving, but there was a bright, almost boyish grin on his face, an unfamiliar satisfaction. Exhilarating, truly exhilarating. "Crocodile, you're strong." Crocodile said nothing, only watched him. "This battle is a draw." Bullet wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and let his fighting posture fall away. "When I grow stronger, I'll come back for you. Next time I won't just hold my own, I will utterly defeat you." He turned then, dragging heavy, tired steps, laughing as he left the ruins. Crocodile remained standing until Bullet's silhouette had fully vanished. Only then did he slump to one knee and cough up a mouthful of blood. "Boss!" the remaining men cried, rushing to his side. "Get out of my way!" Crocodile snapped, shoving them aside as he forced himself up. His gaze was fixed on the path Bullet had taken, his expression unreadable. He felt it, Bullet's will, driven purely by a hunger for strength. By contrast, his own pursuit of power felt tangled with too many other things. He thought of the figure disappearing into the distance, of the shadow of the Roger pirate's ship, and of that man's wild, unrestrained smile flashing through his mind. A short, dry chuckle escaped him. It swelled and deepened until it became outright, unbridled laughter. He straightened slowly, brushed dust from his tattered fur coat, and in the pale morning light, the scars on his face only seemed to harden, making him look more fierce than ever. Chapter 83. Going Against the Current. The trumpeting of Zeus slowly dwindled behind them, swallowed by the vast roar of the sea. On the deck of the Oro Jackson, the celebration showed no sign of slowing. The Mink tribe's tree root wine, enough to keep them drinking for a month, was brought out. Its smoky, charred aroma mixed with the scent of roasted sea beasts, lifting the ship's mood to a fever pitch. "Kuah! My lads, to us!" Roger bellowed, hoisting a massive goblet. His cheeks were flushed, his voice booming as if to shake the skies. He took a long drink, the wine running down his beard, and his infectious vigor set every crewman's blood blazing. "Oh!" the crew shouted together. Glasses clinked, laughter rode the sea breeze, and the deck rang with merriment. "Hey, Shanks, did you see that mink woman? She was totally checking me out. She must have been taken by my handsome nose." Buggy crowed. "You wish, you idiot. Your ridiculous red nose will scare any woman off," Shanks shot back. As always, the two erupted into mock brawling, arguing over something trivial while their faces flushed with good-natured fury. Rayleigh leaned against the rail, wiping his sword with his usual steady motions as he watched the boisterous crew. He smiled at their rowdiness, but his gaze kept drifting back to the captain standing in the center of it all, Roger, laughing the loudest. Roger threw his head back and laughed again, and then suddenly a violent coughing fit erupted from deep in his throat. His laughter cut off. He clapped a hand to his mouth and doubled over. The festive deck fell silent. "Captain?" Jabba asked in a small, muffled voice, his grin frozen. "Cough! Cough! Cough!" Roger waved one hand as if to dismiss it, and with effort forced his breathing steady. He lowered his hand, empty, and that carefree, dazzling grin returned. "Gwaha! I choked on the wine. This stuff's strong." The men hesitated then, encouraged by Roger's laugh. The noise picked up again. Rayleigh's fingers tightened around his hilt, and the look behind his glasses darkened. In the shadow of the mainmast, Kyle watched with deeply furrowed brows. In that instant he heard it, not with his ears, but as a tremor through Roger's life itself, an extremely violent, chaotic falter, like a broken, ominous note cut into an otherwise passionate melody. Roger's iron will smothered it almost at once, but the fracture remained. It wasn't a mere cough. It was a raw, interior wail, as if something deep within him was about to give way. Night fell, and the tumult faded. Inside the chart room, the lamps burned bright. 4 rubbings of the road poneglyph lay spread out on the great nautical chart. With trembling hands, Roger traced the locations recorded on each slab. The 4 points formed a vast diamond. At the diamond's center was a patch of sea no chart had ever marked. The final island. After 800 years, its coordinates were at last laid bare for the world to see. "It's here," Roger murmured, his finger dragging slowly over the numbers. His eyes burned with a light none there had ever seen before. He drew in a deep breath and slammed his fist down on the table. "Brothers!" The voice rang through the cramped chart room, full of unshakable resolve. "Get some rest. Put the ship in top condition. In 3 days we sail, for the final island." "Oh!" A roar of joy threatened to tear the roof off. Shanks and Buggy clung to each other, laughing and crying at once. Jabba slammed his fists together until the knuckles cracked. Rayleigh let himself smile, relief softening the old lines of his face. This was their hour. The Roger pirates were on the verge of their greatest triumph. In the midst of it all, Kyle felt like an island of silence. While everyone else celebrated, he traced his finger over the chart, staring at the final coordinate as if it could tell him what to do. A cold tide rolled through him. Even if Roger made it to the final island, how much time would he have left in his body? He couldn't stand the waiting. He slipped out of the chart room and onto the empty deck. Moonlight spilled like water over the Black Sea. Kyle lifted a hand. A faint electromagnetic pulse shimmered from his fingertips and dissolved into the night. These past few years hadn't been only about adventure for him. Most of his strength had gone into preparing for what would come after, laying plans and contingencies that he could no longer postpone. Using the boba fruit's uncanny detection and information processing abilities, Roger had been compiling every bizarre legend and scrap of intelligence from this world, cross-referencing them with the memories he carried from another life in search of a single sliver of hope. The Op no Mi, the so-called ultimate devil fruit, could perform the immortality operation, but only at the cost of the user's life. In an ocean this vast, where would he even begin to look? And if he found it, who would willingly sacrifice themselves for Roger? Even if such a person existed, Roger would never accept it. How could he ask others to die so he could live? The bones of the 1,000-year dragon were said to yield an elixir of eternal life, but the 1,000-year dragon belonged to ancient, untraceable legend. There was one other possibility left, and it was the most likely target of all: pure gold. It was a legendary ring said to stop the wearer's growth, to freeze the flow of time around them. In short, to grant a kind of immortality. Its material came from the bioluminescent lure of a giant anglerfish that lived in the deep waters somewhere out in the Grand Line. "Have you decided?" Rayleigh's voice came from behind him. He had come up on deck at some point, a bottle of wine in hand. Kyle didn't turn. He only gave a soft, non-committal, Rayleigh moved closer and handed him the bottle. Kyle took it and drank deeply. The fiery liquor scorched his throat, but it couldn't warm the chill in his chest. "Roger? He won't agree," Rayleigh said, leaning on the rail as he looked up at the moon. "I know," Kyle replied evenly. "So I won't tell him. He'll figure it out. Then I'll make sure he can't refuse." Kyle's voice was quiet but hard. "I'll beat him until he's left with no choice." Rayleigh said nothing for a long moment. Remember, he studied Kyle's profile in the moonlight. This companion, who had always been soft around others, now wore a stubborn, immovable resolve. Finally, he sighed, a sound halfway between resignation and sympathy, and slapped a hand against Kyle's shoulder. "What do you need me to do? Help me prepare a small boat and enough supplies." "All right." At dawn, when the first pale fingers of sunlight split the horizon, a small single-masted boat slipped away from the Oro Jackson. He had made sure not to disturb anyone on board. Only Rayleigh had noticed. Standing in the little craft, Kyle looked back. In the morning light, the Oro Jackson was strikingly majestic, cutting through the waves as it held to its chosen course toward that legendary destination. On her decks were his dearest companions and his beloved captain. Kyle let his eyes linger, trying to memorize every line of the ship as if he could carve it into his memory. Then he turned away with a steadying breath. "Damn you, Roger. Don't you dare die on me." Ahead of him was a route nothing like the one the Roger pirates were following. Unfamiliar, dangerous seas, a gamble with no certain outcome. Still, for that fading light on the verge of going out, he would risk the currents and face whatever lay ahead. The sun seemed to rise earlier over the Oro Jackson that morning. The crew, still nursing last night's excesses, rubbed sleep from their eyes when Buggy's loud cries rang out across the deck. "Hey, has anyone seen Kyle?" The usually flamboyant clown's face was uncharacteristically anxious. "His hammock is empty." "He probably went for his morning exercise, right?" Jabba yawned, unconcerned. Shanks scanned the ship, brows tightening. "No, I can't sense him anywhere on board." Only then did the alarm spread. They tore through the Oro Jackson, the crow's nest, the galley, the storage hold, even Roger's own cabin, every nook and cranny, but there was no sign of Kyle. At the stern, they noticed something odd. The little single-masted spare boat was gone, and several cut rope ends that had been used to lash supplies lay scattered on the planks. "That guy ran off alone?" someone muttered. "Why?" another cried. Confusion and suspicion rippled through the crew. They were on the verge of sailing to the final island. This was no time for a core member to vanish without a word. Rayleigh's voice, quiet and measured, cut through the rising clamor. "Quiet, everyone." The single command had an almost immediate calming effect. The deck fell still. Rayleigh leaned against the main mast, his glasses catching the morning light so that his eyes were hidden behind a glare. "Kyle has something he has to do. Something very important to all of us," he said. No sooner had the sentence left his lips than the captain's cabin door burst open. Roger stepped out. He had no cap on, his black hair tousled, and his face looked a little pale, but his eyes shone with an unusual brightness. He glanced first at the empty boat rack, then at Rayleigh, and finally swept his gaze across every crew member on deck. The ship fell deadly silent. Roger cleared his throat with a soft cough, then grinned, smiling so wide it seemed to light the deck. "Koo-ha! That brat, always trying to look cool." He sounded neither angry nor accusatory. The smile carried indulgence, a helpless fondness, and warmth. The crew stared, stunned. There was no scolding in the captain's expression, only amused affection. Roger crossed to the helm and slapped both hands down on the wheel, the sharp sound cutting through the gloom. "Lads, what are you standing around for?" he roared. "That Kyle fellow's gone off to put together a surprise celebration feast for us. We won't let him think we're idle, will we? Hoist the sails." Destination, the final island. "Oh!" A thunderous shout rolled across the deck. For a moment doubt flickered in their hearts, but their absolute faith in their captain swept those worries away. The Oro Jackson trimmed its sails, caught the wind, and pressed on into the uncharted sea. No one noticed, though, that as Roger turned away, he muttered under his breath, "That bastard always has to make things so difficult for himself." The crossing to the final island was far longer and far more dangerous than anyone had expected. This forgotten stretch of ocean had moods of its own, sudden weather changes, wild currents, and hazards around every shoal. At one point, they drifted into a shroud the crew called the Mist of Lost Souls, a fog that never let up and sent every compass and log post spinning madly. For half a month, the Oro Jackson went in circles like a headless fly. "Damn it, what is wrong with this cursed place?" Buggy grabbed his head and teetered on the edge of panic. If Kyle were here, he'd know the right way. He could hear it, I swear. Then came a storm like nothing any of them had seen. Towering walls of water that smashed against the hull, waves the size of mountains that threatened to snap the mainmast clean off. They clung to the rigging with white-knuckled grips, fighting to keep the ship from being ripped apart by the storm. Sheets of rain blurred the world into gray, and the sea rose and fell like something alive, eager to swallow them whole. Shanks wiped rain from his face and stared at the churning water. "If Kyle were here," he muttered, voice half a joke and half a prayer, his ability could at least cut these waves in half. That line had a history. A few weeks earlier, while fleeing a marine pursuit, they'd blundered into a shallow patch of hidden reefs. It was a moonless, pitch-black night. Navigation instruments were useless, and panic was a constant friend. Time and again, Jabba dove into the icy water, feeling for rocks and channels with his own body and guiding the ship inch by painful inch. By the time they hauled him back aboard, he was cut and bruised, lips blue from the cold. He sat wrapped in blankets, sipping hot soup with a shiver and a crooked grin. If Kyle were here, he said between spoonfuls, he'd map this seabed better than any chart. Before long, if Kyle were here, became their private refrain. During the nearly year-long voyage that followed, any time the crew hit a snag or faced a danger they couldn't answer, the line came out without thinking. A way of naming the missing piece of their family. Kyle wasn't physically among them, but the memory of him steadied them in surprisingly tangible ways. His absence felt less like emptiness and more like a presence everyone shared. And Kyle hadn't vanished completely from their lives either. He never broke ties entirely, a message, a rumor, a small favor carried by a stray contact, so the thought of him could be comfort and curse in the same breath. Either way, mentioning his name became their way of getting through another hard night at sea. About 2 months after he left, a news coup wheeled over the Oro Jackson and dropped a small oilcloth-wrapped parcel onto the deck. Inside was a piece of deep-sea coral that gave off a strange rank smell, and a note written in a bold, cramped hand. Roger, grind it into powder. Take it with high-proof alcohol. No nonsense. What the hell is that? Smells like the captain's socks haven't been washed in 100 years. Buggy complained, pinching his nose. Roger, however, turned the coral over in his hands and smiled with a warmth that had been rare lately. He pictured that stubborn fellow diving into the deep, fighting some sea beast over and over just to bring back this thing. He laughed aloud, a booming guffaw. "Koo-ha! Special medicine from Kyle," he announced, then tossed the coral to Crocus. Crocus followed the note to the letter. He ground the coral into powder, mixed it with high-proof alcohol, and handed Roger a bowl. Between the note's imperious tone and Roger's desire to calm his worried crew, he obediently downed the foul-tasting concoction. After that, every month or two, more little surprises like this would fall from the sky. Sometimes the cure came as the legendary bark of the giggle tree, sometimes as the flower of life, a sacrificial relic brought back from a reclusive tribe, and once he'd been given a suspicious little crystal that someone swore were dragon's tears. Each time Roger would laugh, spit out a curse, that fool got duped again, and swallow the potion without a second thought. None of it worked. Time kept doing what time does. It wore him down. His body grew steadily weaker. The coughs came more often, sometimes ending in blood in the dead of night. He tried to hide it with louder laughter and a braver face, a swagger that said he was still the same man. The exhaustion, though, was like barnacles on a ship's hull, piling on until no amount of scrubbing could remove them completely. The crew played along. They tacitly indulged him, throwing more parties, drinking more, making the laughter and music louder. In their own frantic way, they resisted the quiet that was creeping closer, the silence everyone called death, by filling the ship with as much noise and light as they could muster. Chapter 85. Go Home. Nearly a year of wandering had left new dents and scars along the hull of the Oro Jackson. At last they had come to the final resupply stop before the end of their legendary voyage, a nameless little port town. The air there smelled of sea salt and rum, and carried a faint, peculiar tang of something like, of all things, the end. In the town's only tavern, the Roger pirates had once again laid claim to the place. Another big barrel, barkeep! Jabba's thick arm sent an empty keg crashing onto the bar. Cups and plates rattled in its wake. "Shanks, you bastard! Did you steal my drink again?" "You just drink too slow, Red Nose." Shanks shot back, and with that, Shanks and Buggy were rolling on the floor, fists and laughter flying. The rest of the crew cheered and hooted, the tavern full of boisterous life, as if everyone there was trying to shout away an entire year's worth of fatigue and salt and worry. Roger didn't join in. He sat by himself in a corner booth, a single glass of water untouched before him. He watched his crewmates, the flushed faces, the bright, reckless eyes, and a faint smile curved his lips. They'd lost count of how many times someone had muttered, "If Kyle were here, this would be perfect," but they'd still come this far. Every one of them was steadier and stronger than they had been a year ago. Roger felt proud, Yet a hollow spot remained in that pride, as if a masterpiece were nearly finished, but missing the single most important piece. He lifted his water glass, felt a dry tickle at the back of his throat, and forced it down. Time was running out, for him and for this voyage. He rose, smiled, and waved as the crew called after him, "One more drink, Captain." But he didn't go back to the ship. Instead, he walked the pier alone to the far end of the empty breakwater. The sea breeze tousled his black hair as he reached into his coat and pulled out a small transponder snail, Kyle's. It had been intended for private, direct messages between them. In the past year, it had only ever rung once, when Kyle let Rayleigh know he was safe and eased everyone's fears. After a few short letters, there had been a long silence. Roger flipped the switch. Purr-purr-purr. Purr-purr-purr. The transponder snail imitated the sound of dialing, its eye stalks unblinking. Click. Somewhere in the Grand Line, in an unnamed, sunless trench, light itself felt outlawed. This was a dead zone, a graveyard of sound where silence and darkness ruled unchallenged. The carcass of a giant anglerfish, large enough to swallow a small island, drifted like a black island in that still water. Its great tentacles, which once lured prey with soft, ghostly lights, hung dull and lifeless like withered vines. A briny, rotten stench seeped from the corpse and tainted the surrounding water. Perched atop that ruined beast sat a lone figure. Kyle's clothes were smeared with slime and stained with blood. The fabric was corroded and ragged, shot through with holes. He had been there a very long time. His golden eyes, dulled by fatigue, stared unseeingly at the anglerfish's dead bioluminescent organ. Inside it was nothing, no pure gold, no miraculous substance rumored to halt the flow of time. Nothing at all. A year had passed. Armed with years of compiled intelligence, he had chased down ancient legends, braved countless hazardous stretches of sea, and fought more monsters than he could count. He had come to this forbidding place because every clue, every rumor, had pointed here. Time and again, he'd expected some final treasure or revelation to fix everything. Instead, he found only dark water and the hollow bones of an enormous, unlit predator. He had sent those so-called legendary elixirs, things that sounded like scams, again and again to Roger. He had pinned his last hope on that legendary man. And yet the result was nothing, an empty, crushing disappointment that closed in on him like the pressure of the deep sea. Then the silence was broken by a sudden, familiar ringing. Purr-purr, purr-purr. The transponder snail in his arms vibrated, its little eye, mimicking Roger's, blinking anxiously. Kyle's whole body shook as if struck by electricity. He fumbled the snail out and answered on instinct, his voice raw and sandpaper thin. "Roger! Hoo-ha! You're still alive, you rascal!" Roger's hearty laugh came through, as lively as ever. "I thought some sea king made a snack out of you." At the sound of that voice, the taut cord around Kyle's heart snapped. Urgency and panic surged up so suddenly he nearly choked on his words, spilling them out as fast as they would come. "Roger, I found it! The legendary giant anglerfish, the source of pure gold, I found it!" Kyle gasped into the transponder snail, breath coming fast. His voice trembled and he didn't even notice. "But this can't be the only one. The legend has to be true. Give me a little more time and I'll find the next one. I'll find pure gold. Then I'll—" He trailed off, voice rising with desperate hope. "Kyle." Roger's voice cut in, soft and steady, like a warm hand laid over a fevered brow. The single word pressed down on Kyle's frantic words and stopped them. Enough. On the other end of the line, Roger sounded calm, but there was a weight behind his quiet tone that brooked no argument. There was no blame, no disappointment, only a steady reassurance that made Kyle's chest tighten. "What, enough?" Kyle blurted, heart pounding. I can cure you. I haven't given up on you. You idiot." Roger chuckled, the sound surprisingly light. "But we've arrived. The final island is right before us." Final island. The name hit Kyle like a thunderclap. He went perfectly still. It had already been a year he'd spent chasing half-guessed rumors and ghost stories while the rest of the crew rode the ocean toward the end of their quest. Now, as he chased legends, his friends were finally on the verge of reaching the thing they had all been dreaming about. "This voyage has been brutal," Roger said, his voice threaded with something like feeling and a faint fatigue. "That mist, like a wall of ghosts, and those storms that seemed able to turn the sky itself, the crew talked about you every day. He paused, then laughed. They nearly worshipped you. Kyle said nothing, white-knuckled around the transponder snail. He could picture it all, his friends calling his name in terror. Roger's voice softened. So come back, Kyle. But your illness, Kyle began. That's my problem. Roger cut him off, more serious than Kyle had ever heard him. I have to finish my own journey myself. Do you understand? Kyle stayed silent. I'm about to become Pirate King. The familiar, unrivaled grandeur returned to Roger's voice. If you miss something this important, I won't forgive you. Besides, if you're not there, that kid Buggy will be bragging all over the place that he found the final island. You've got to come back and keep an eye on him. Kuaha! The old joke, meant to be comforting, hit Kyle like a sledgehammer. We'll wait for you at the last island, Roger said, his voice carrying clearly across tens of thousands of miles of ocean through the transponder snail. The celebration feast won't be the same without a contributor like you. After a long pause, Kyle finally managed a single word. Okay. He ended the call and cradled the transponder snail against his chest. Slowly he rose and stood on the carcass of the enormous beast beneath him. Had his gamble to go against the current been defeated by time? It seemed not entirely. Next, go home. 86. Take me there, Captain. Take me there, Captain. Kyle fixed on a single heading and became a blur of light, rushing toward the rising sun. Going home. Once the thought took root, it swelled until it shoved aside the disappointment and exhaustion that had threatened to crush him. The smiling faces of his crewmates, Roger's booming laugh, the creak of the rudder, the clatter of the banquet hall, sounds he had tried to erase for a year, snapped back into sharp focus and became his only compass. A few days later, in the port of an unnamed fishing town, the Oro Jackson lay quiet at the quay, her sails furled like a lion tucking in its claws. The afternoon sun spilled lazily across the deck, and a few crewmen dozed against the rail. From the shadows, a figure detached itself and landed lightly on a piling at the dock, not waking a soul. Kyle stood there, staring at the ship he knew so well. The fresh scars along her hull read like a mute chronicle of the year he had been away. He could picture it easily, the kind of storm that had ripped a hole in the mainsail, the flash of cannon fire that had left scorch marks along the plank. He didn't board the ship. Instead, he headed for the town's only tavern, where the smell of alcohol and a raucous clamor spilled out into the street. Before he reached the door, the din burst out first. So my Lord Buggy shaved that Marine Rear Admiral's beard off with a flying knife. You should have seen his face, ha ha ha. Show off. I saw you being chased everywhere, rolling on the ground, snot running down your face. What did you call me, you red-haired bastard? I'm talking about you, Red-Nose, Buggy. The voices were familiar, the same bickering and rough laughter he'd heard 100 times. Perfect. Kyle paused at the doorway, watching two kids wrestling on the tavern floor while their friends howled with laughter. The year of gloom that had weighed on him seemed to evaporate in that burst of warmth. He stepped inside. The tavern was dim. His figure was backlit and dark against the bright light from the street. For a moment, no one even noticed him. As Jabba lifted his wineglass, something at the door caught his eye. His hand froze in midair, and he squinted, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Hey, look! Everyone followed his finger toward the entrance. Shanks and Buggy, who had been wrestling, stopped mid-scuffle, hair askew and looking dazed. For a heartbeat, the tavern's noise dropped away, replaced by a stunned silence. Kyle, bro! Buggy's shriek shattered the quiet. He shoved Shanks aside and scrambled toward the doorway, his frantic movements nearly sending him face-first into a table. You! Is it really you? Shanks rubbed the back of his head where he'd been bumped and pushed himself up with his usual easy grin. I knew I felt something. Then, like a released floodgate, the whole tavern erupted. Kyle! You scoundrel! Where have you been? You bastard! You finally came back! The crew swarmed him instantly, closing in so tightly that not even a drop of water could get through. Heavy, hearty hands slapped him across the shoulders and back, hard pats meant to prove he was flesh and blood, not a ghost. We thought you'd been kidnapped by some island princess, someone laughed. Look at those rags. Did they drag you off to slave in the mines? Another teased. You've lost weight, Kyle? Couldn't afford a proper meal? The barbs were rough but warm, a tide of good-natured mockery that rolled over him and left him grinning despite himself. They shoved him toward a table and shoved a full glass of orange juice into his hand. He blinked at the familiar faces around him, their relief and joy plain and bright like the drink in his palm. "Sorry I'm late getting back," he said. "Late? The feast hasn't even started," Jabba bellowed, clapping him on the back so hard Kyle nearly spilled his drink. "You scoundrel! If you hadn't shown, all the glory would have gone to that brat Buggy." Exactly, Buggy preened, puffing out his chest. "It was my brilliant scoop, the info about the final island." Shanks' boot caught him in the backside mid-sentence and sent him stumbling forward. Kyle couldn't help it. The motion, the rough camaraderie, the voices he'd missed, all of it opened something inside him. He let himself smile. It was the first real smile he'd managed in a year. At that moment, the crowd parted, and two figures stepped through. Rayleigh and Roger, walking side by side. Rayleigh leaned against the bar, eyes calm behind his glasses. He gave Kyle a long, appraising look, nodded once, no questions asked. Roger, on the other hand, came up grinning, white teeth flashing. "Ha ha ha! You scoundrel! Finally decided to come back!" He didn't ask where Kyle had been, what he'd done, or whether he'd found what he was looking for. Instead, he thrust out his fist and gave Kyle a hearty punch in the chest. "No feast is complete without me." Kyle bumped his fist against Roger's in return. Roger dropped his hand, turned to the assembled crew, and threw his arm up high. "Lads, our last companion has returned." He swept his gaze over them, Shanks, Buggy, Jabba, Crocus, then settled again on Kyle. "Set sail." Roger's voice rang through the tavern, bright with boldness and joy. "Go and conquer this world." A roar rose so loud it nearly tore the roof off the tavern. That night, the Oro Jackson shone like a beacon as the long-awaited full-crew banquet got underway. The smell of roasted meat and the heady tang of rum mingled and rode out on the sea breeze, carrying their celebration far across the water. Kyle kept getting drink after drink handed to him as his companions traded stories of the year gone by. With every tale came the same refrain, "If only Kyle were here." It never sounded like complaint. If anything, there was a quiet pride in it, as though to say, "See? We did it without you." He smiled, listened, and drank. The warmth of the banquet still clung to the decks, but it felt as if the signal to weigh anchor had already been given. "Hey, Shanks, seen that fool Buggy anywhere?" Jabba called without looking up, fingers tightening on the rigging as he checked the ropes. "We leave tomorrow." "Knowing him, he's tucked away in some corner plotting his next treasure map," Shanks replied. He leaned against the rail and wiped his cutlass, then rose and headed toward the apprentices' quarters. Kyle stood beneath the mainmast and watched. The crew were at their posts, moving with practiced, synchronized ease. At the bow, Roger stared into the distance, his figure steady and immovable, like a mountain that refused to be shaken. Everything felt orderly, charged with the quiet gravity of people about to witness history. The hush, however, was shattered by a sudden exclamation. "Hey, Buggy! What's wrong with you?" Everyone turned toward the voice to find Shanks halfway out of a doorway, his usual amused expression replaced by a rare mix of concern and disgust. Kyle and Rayleigh exchanged a look and came over together. On the bed, Buggy lay swaddled in a quilt, his cheeks flushed, breathing fast, cold sweat beating across his forehead. Crocus stepped forward, pressed his hand to Buggy's brow, and his face straightened. "High fever. A very high fever." Shanks folded his arms and looked down at the sick man with that teasing tone he always used. "Of all times to catch a cold, on the eve of a big adventure, no less. Are you a child? Your face is burning. Just lie still." At the sound of his voice, Buggy stirred, lazily opening one eye. His gaze was glassy with fever, but when he recognized the flash of red hair above him, he snapped back, stubborn as ever. "Shut it! Who said my nose is big and red?" A vein immediately throbbed at Shanks's temple. "Huh? What sort of nonsense are you spouting, you idiot? You're delirious. I was talking about your face," someone barked. "Fight! Fight!" Roger and Kazuki Odin barreled up to the cabin at the commotion and planted themselves in the doorway, grinning like men who lived for a brawl. Shanks shot them a glare. "Captain, don't egg him on!" Napped, then turned to clamp both hands on Buggy, who was thrashing against the blankets. "Lay still, you fool!" "Let go of me, you red-haired bastard!" Buggy howled, twisting wildly under the quilt as the fever drove him into a single-minded obsession. The final island, there's treasure beyond imagining. Shanks kept a firm grip on his shoulders, trying to calm him. Then, as if his fever conspired with his devil fruit, the upper half of Buggy suddenly shot out of the covers like a cannonball and latched onto Roger's thigh. His legs and lower body stayed neatly on the bed as if nothing had happened. Kyle stood there, staring at the absurd sight, uncertain which expression to wear. Buggy, snot and tears running down his face, wrapped his arms around Roger's leg and bawled at the top of his lungs. "Incredible treasures are waiting for me. Captain, take me." Completely beside himself, he didn't even notice he'd been split in two. Roger glanced down at the little attachment clinging to his leg and laughed even louder. He scooped Buggy up by the scruff of his neck like a kitten. "Koo-ha! If you want to come, you'll have to wait until you're well, kid." The cabin was a mess of noise and motion. Some of the crew howled with laughter, while others were frantically trying to dig Buggy's lower half out from under the quilt. After a lot of commotion, and with Crocus forcing a bitter herbal concoction down his throat, Buggy finally ran out of energy. They pieced him back together as best they could, tucked him into bed, and he fell into a heavy sleep. Even then, he twitched and muttered in his sleep, "Take me with you, my treasure. Don't steal mine." Nonsense that only made a few people grin. Slowly the clamor died away until only the core members remained. The mood settled into something heavier. Everyone realized the obvious. In Buggy's condition, let alone making it to the final island, he probably wouldn't even be able to get out of bed. And a voyage into those uncharted waters wouldn't afford them the luxury of waiting for someone to recover. Seriously, of all times. Jabba muttered, scratching his head in helpless frustration. "One of you could stay behind and get the doctors in town to look after him," a crewman offered, then immediately backtracked. No, leaving him alone here would be too risky. Silence fell. Shanks, who had been standing by the bed watching Buggy's flushed, sleeping face, the usual mockery wiped clean, finally spoke. "I'll stay and take care of him." His voice was soft, but it landed like a pebble in a still pond. Everyone turned in surprise. Kazuki Odin leaned over with a curious look and studied him. "Buggy's making quite a fuss. Are you really going to stay, Red?" he asked. Shanks hesitated, only for a heartbeat. He smoothed the corner of the quilt over Buggy's kicking feet, then looked slowly around the room until his eyes rested on Roger. Where there had once been a boyish glance, something steadier and older answered now, a clarity and resolve that outstripped his years. "If we're going," he said quietly, "we'll go on our own ship someday." He spoke as if it were a small thing, but the promise in his words settled over the room and moved everyone who heard it. Kyle's heart trembled. The child had grown up. Sniffle, sniffle. Roger said nothing, only listening. Then, with his familiar smile, he stepped in front of Shanks, laid his broad palm on his head, and ruffled Shanks's red hair vigorously. 87. Misfortunes never come singly. Roger's big hand mussed Shanks' red hair, as if trying to press the young man's unusually deep maturity into his very bones. Shanks didn't flinch. He just grinned and let his captain rearrange the carefully styled mane. "Koo-ha! Well said!" Roger laughed, then drew his hand back and swept his gaze around the cabin. Kazuki Odin, Rayleigh, Jabba, and finally Kyle. "Did you hear that? These are my crewmates." His laughter filled the room, loud and familiar, but there was something else behind it, a complicated flicker in his bright eyes. Relief and pride shone there, layered with a faint, almost wistful melancholy that comes with the passing of time. "All right, stop standing around," Rayleigh said, pushing his glasses up. His voice broke the brief, charged silence. "Let Crocus examine Buggy properly, and we need to get ready to leave. Time waits for no one." The circle dispersed. Crocus moved in beside the sleeping Buggy, who still lay unconscious and pale on the bench, while the rest of the crew returned to their tasks. Outside, activity hummed along the deck. Sails were checked, ropes coiled and secured. The last of the provisions were counted and lashed down. Men ran through familiar motions with a taut efficiency, no useless chatter, no wasted gestures. Each action a small reassurance that the Oro Jackson was being readied. Below the visible bustle, a different kind of preparation took place. The ship itself seemed to hold its breath, a great slumbering beast bracing for movement. The Oro Jackson, a sleeping lion that had carried its captain through countless storms and battles, was about to bare its sharpest claws once more. Crocus worked quietly over Buggy, hands steady as he assessed injuries and murmured to himself. Around him, the crew's nervous energy smoothed into the steady rhythm of departure. Time did not wait, nor, they all knew, did the misfortunes that seemed determined to follow them. As the saying goes, good fortune doesn't come in pairs, but trouble never comes alone. A few hours later, during the crew's final navigation meeting on deck, that proverb proved true. Rayleigh was halfway through pointing at the sea chart. So according to the Poneglyph's guidance, after we pass through this, he began when a sudden sneeze cut him off. Achoo! The ship was quiet enough that the sound carried. All eyes turned to Shanks, who had been casually leaning against the railing. He was rubbing at his nose, and his cheeks were flushed an odd, deep red. Hey, Shanks, Jabba said, narrowing his eyes in amusement. Why's your face redder than your hair, kid? Nonsense. I'm perfectly fine. Shanks protested, straightening his neck, but his voice came out thick and nasal. It was hardly convincing. He swayed on his feet and nearly toppled forward. Only a quick hand from a nearby crewmate kept him from falling. Kozuki Odin leaned in, curiosity written across his face, and reached out to touch Shanks's forehead. Shanks laughed, forcing himself to stay upright. Ha! I'm fine. It's just a bit hot on deck. Hot? Nosdon glanced up at the sky, then let the cool sea breeze wash over his face, puzzled. Where's it hot? Shanks's stubbornness didn't last. The world began to tilt, the sea chart and his companions' faces blurred. He shook his head to clear the dizziness, but his legs gave out beneath him. Tsk, seriously. That was his last thought before everything went black. When he came to, he was lying in a different berth beside Buggy. The room smelled strongly of dried herbs. Crocus was waiting over him, an expression that said, I told you so, as he held a bowl of dark medicine to Shanks's lips. Drink this. Why am I here? Shanks tried to sit up, but his whole body protested, aching and heavy, with no strength to push himself up. Why else, you idiot? Crocus snapped. You caught a fever, too. Your temperature's higher than when Buggy first collapsed. You two are a pair of troublesome. From the next bed, Buggy turned, half awake, and mumbled, Red-haired. Idiot. Who are you calling an idiot? Shanks snapped, his temper flaring as he shot a glare in Buggy's direction. The effort set off a fit of coughing. His face went beet red with every rasping breath. On the deck, the mood was heavier than when Buggy had first gone down. Someone in the crowd muttered, Both of them are sick. What do we do now? And Shanks' fever is worse, another replied. He can't possibly stay behind to look after Buggy. Are we going to postpone the voyage? Silence fell. Heads turned toward the bow, where Roger stood with his back to them, saying nothing. No one dared force the question to the captain. Everyone knew how precious Roger's remaining time was. Delaying even a single day felt like stealing one more step away from the final island, and like chipping away at the little life the captain had left. In that stifling quiet, a calm voice cut through. I'll stay behind. Kyle stepped forward from the crowd and planted himself in the center of the deck. Instantly, all eyes swung to him. Shock, confusion, and a trace of admiration flitted across faces. Kyle? Jabba was the first to gasp, his eyes widening as if he hadn't heard right. What are you talking about? You just got back. Yeah, Kyle, a young crewman piped up eagerly. We're heading to the final island. This is the end of the voyage. How can you not come with us? We finally have everyone together. How can you split up now? No, absolutely not. Protest rippled through the deck. They had waited for Kyle for a year. Now that he was home, he was trying to leave at the last minute. Nobody could accept that. Voices rose, faces flushed with disbelief and anger. Rayleigh, however, stayed calm. He watched Kyle quietly from behind his glasses, expression unreadable. Kyle, do you understand what this means? He asked. It meant missing the chance to witness history, losing the right to share in the glory when the Pirate King was born, forfeiting the final chapter of this great voyage. Kyle's answer came without hesitation. I understand. He glanced toward the cabin where coughing came through the door, then swept his gaze across the anxious faces on deck. Those two need someone to look after them, and he paused, choosing his words. This town isn't entirely safe. I can't leave those two sick kids behind, Kyle said. I won't feel right about it. Besides, they're my personal disciples. His reasoning was calm and reasonable, full of genuine concern, an argument no one could easily dismiss. The others could only stare and fret. All the same, it can't be you. Jabba slammed his fist against the ship's railing with a dull thud. Anyone else could go, but not you. You're the core of this ship. Exactly, someone else chimed in. If Brother Kyle goes, we can't agree to it, another voice protested. As the voices rose into a heated clamor, Roger, who had been silent until now, at last turned around. 88, Kyle's choice. Roger let his gaze sweep over the excited faces on deck until it rested on Kyle. He didn't smile, and he wasn't angry. The fierce fire that usually lived in his eyes was gone, replaced by a bottomless calm that made everyone uneasy. Kyle. He spoke only one name, and the noisy deck fell silent as if someone had cut the wind out of the sails. The only sound left was cloth flapping in the ocean under the hull. Roger's voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of an anchor, striking at the heart of every man there. You know where we're headed next, he said. That's the goal we've all been chasing together, and you're telling me now you want to stop just short of the finish? There was no question in his tone, only a statement, but the statement bore more force than any shout. It held everything the ship and its crew had gone through since they set sail. Every storm, every loss, every shared dream. I understand. Kyle met Roger's gaze without flinching. His face was steady. But the destination, for me, it might not be the same as yours. Not the same? Jabba bellowed, unable to keep himself in check. What's different? Aren't we family? Someone protested. Precisely because we are family. Kyle's eyes flicked toward the cabin where his two most unruly apprentices lay feverish. I can't leave two kids with high fevers on this ship. Shanks gets worse than Buggy when he runs a fever. Then someone else can go. I'll go. Voices rose again. I'll go. I'm a good swimmer, and I can fight well enough, another crew member shouted. Everyone shut up, Rayleigh barked, and the sudden command smothered the argument. He pushed his glasses up his nose. The light behind the lenses made his gaze razor-sharp. Kyle, give us a real reason. Any one of us can look after a pair of sick kids, but missing the final island, that's not something anyone can shrug off. Kyle fell quiet for a moment, arranging his words. The crew leaned in. My body's a little different from yours, he said finally, his tone calm, as if commenting on the weather. You all know my fruit is the boba fruit. Heads nodded. Nobody here was ignorant of Kyle's devil fruit. For years I've been studying how to use it to strengthen myself, he went on. I can manipulate extremely subtle electromagnetic waves. With them I can influence, even control, the electric currents inside living organisms. There was a beat of stunned silence. You mean you can affect a person's nerves? Someone asked. Kyle gave a small, sober nod. Nerves and muscle fibers are driven by tiny electric currents. I can nudge those currents, coax them to calm down or speed up. Fevers are chaotic. The body's systems are overheating and firing irregularly. I can smooth that out, bring temperature and heart rate back to safer rhythms. Rayleigh's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a new tone of calculation. So you're saying you can treat them more effectively than we could with normal care? Yes. Kyle's gaze dropped to the closed cabin door. But it's not simple. It takes prolonged concentration and direct contact. I can't leave them alone while I channel and monitor what I'm doing. And there's another risk. The techniques I've been developing are delicate. If I push too hard, I could destabilize a patient's nervous system instead of steadying it. It's precise work, and it's draining. The crew's chatter softened into reluctant understanding. Missing Final Island still weighed on their minds, but the idea of leaving two kids' lives to chance did not sit well. A muffled cough came from the cabin. Even from the deck, they could hear a small, half-conscious mutter that sounded suspiciously like Buggy's laugh. Rayleigh sighed, then lifted a hand. All right, we'll split up. A few of us will take the longboat and get to Final Island ahead of the others. The rest will stay and help Kyle. We can't risk the children, and we can't afford to split the crew without a plan. Shanks, hot and tossing in sheets, moaned something incoherent. Someone, Chuck, led nervously. Buggy, though absent-mindedly supporting a crate, wiped his brow and said, You better not let him use that funny trick on me, Kyle. I don't want to come out looking like a boiled lobster. Kyle allowed himself a small, rare smile. I won't do anything that isn't necessary. I'll be careful. They organized quickly. A handful of able hands volunteered to take the small boat and make for the island as soon as the wind turned east. The rest stayed to help Kyle keep watch. Rayleigh clapped a hand on Kyle's shoulder before he left. If you run into trouble, send a flare. We'll be back as fast as we can. I know, Kyle said. He paused at the cabin door, listening to the shallow, irregular breaths beyond it. He thought about the years in the lab, about the nights coaxing microscopic fields into alignment until a twitch stopped and a fever broke. He thought of the cost, the hours of exhaustion afterward, the times his own muscles had trembled from the strain of holding another's currents steady. He opened the door and stepped inside. The cabin was dim and warm. Shanks lay curled on the bunk, limbs tossed, the fever making his dark hair cling to his forehead. Beside him, the other apprentice, younger and smaller, cheeks flushed too, blinked sleepily as Kyle knelt down. All right, Kyle murmured, settling his palm lightly against the smaller boy's chest. He let himself listen to the electric murmurs under the skin, the quick, chaotic fire of fever. He breathed out, reached inward with the boba fruit's subtle pull, and began to guide those currents, as carefully as a craftsman tending fragile glass. Outside, the ship's wake cut through the night. A small group rowed away toward the island that promised glory and risk. Behind them, the rest of the crew stayed aboard, clustered near the cabin door on watch, exchanging quiet, hopeful looks. They had gone after the dream, but tonight, for the sake of family, some would wait and nurse what mattered most. Electric currents? A crewman repeated, scratching his head in confusion. You mean some new kind of shock attack? Kyle smiled faintly. Not exactly. Think of it like this. I can stimulate my own cells and keep them in their most active state. That only made things worse. These rough-handed sailors, men who'd spent their lives fighting wind, waves, and enemy blades, blinked blankly at talk of cells and stimulation. Kozuki Oden, however, brightened as if he'd stumbled onto a new island. Oh, Kyle-san, you mean you can stay full of energy all the time? Like after a big meal? Crude, but surprisingly close. Kyle nodded. That's pretty much it. There are two immediate effects. One, my recovery and strength are far beyond a normal person's. And two, he let the sentence hang, looking around at the faces watching him. My aging has been slowed down a great deal. Silence fell across the deck. The men stared at him with wide eyes, as if they'd been shown something impossible. They stared at Kyle. He looked no older than 25 or 26. Then at the lines carved into their own faces by salt wind and years. Jabba was the first to react. He stepped forward and gave Kyle a once-over, eyes narrowing. Wait, how old are you exactly? Let me do the math. Over 30, Kyle said calmly. 30? The number landed like a thunderclap. The crew, many of them around the same age as each other, and weathered into what looked like uncles, gaped at the impossibly youthful man before them. Kyle spread his hands as if to present the obvious. You see, I'm still a young man. Your era is reaching its grand finale, while my adventure is only getting started. A slyness and a faint, hard-to-place sigh tugged at his smile, the sort of expression meant for a very long road ahead. If I joined you now, learned every secret of this world, and watched the end of the journey, what would I do with the possibly very long years that follow? Sit in a tavern every day, a living legend, bragging about my youthful exploits? I'd die of boredom. He shook his head. That would be far too dull. An uninteresting life is not what I want, Kyle said. I want to discover the truth of this world, little by little, with my own eyes. And one day, when I finally reach that place, I want to be able to smile and tell you, see, I'm here, not far behind you. When he finished, the deck fell silent. The crew members who had been loudly opposed moments before had nothing to say. They looked at Kyle with complicated expressions. They might not have understood what he meant by cells or bioelectricity, but they understood what he was really saying. It wasn't an excuse, and it wasn't surrender. It was a larger, freer choice. What could be more precious to a pirate than freedom? Kyle was protecting his curiosity, the chance to let future adventures keep their wonder instead of stripping it bare by finding all the answers too soon. The argument was almost indulgent in its willfulness, but it carried the particular kind of romance pirates lived for, and no one could really refute it. "That's maddening in its own way," Jabba muttered, taking 2 steps back before flopping down on the deck and scratching his head with a wry smile. Rayleigh leaned against the mainmast, eyes cast down, his expression unreadable. The ship remained quiet, the choice made and accepted in the hush that followed. After a long silence, Roger finally chuckled and shook his head. "You win," he admitted softly. The stern expression he'd worn a moment before melted away. He looked at Kyle, and a warm spark of gratitude and understanding flared in his eyes. He stepped toward him across the deck. The invisible weight that had hung over the place seemed to lift, replaced by the plain, unguarded trust of a captain in his crew. Then Roger's booming laugh exploded into the harbor. "Ha! You scoundrel! What a bastard!" he roared, clapping an arm around Kyle's shoulders. "You go on like we're a bunch of old men itching to retire." His laughter faded, and his face grew serious again. He held out his fist and stopped it just in front of Kyle's chest. "Then it's settled. Take good care of those 2 kids." Kyle returned the smile and bumped his fist against Roger's. "Of course." Roger swung around, arm raised high toward the crew, his voice ringing with bold cheer and no trace of gloom. "Men, did you all hear that? Don't look so down," somebody shouted. "Our mate's only taken the scenic route." A sudden roar of laughter, "Oh!" shattered the tense silence. The crew finally exhaled. Where there had been doubt in their eyes, there was now relief and understanding. Blessings and friendly jibes followed. "Kyle, drinks are on you later," someone called. "When you reach the final island, don't expect any favors. The treasure's ours. Ha ha ha," another taunted. "Treasures first come, first served, you bastards," came the good-natured shout from the deck. The Oro Jackson snapped back to life, alive again with the clamor it had carried before they set sail. Kyle lingered on the edge of the crowd, watching his shipmates return to their tasks. At the bow, Roger had resumed his post, looking out toward the horizon as if nothing had happened. Chapter 89. The departure of the Oro Jackson was not marked by any ceremony. At first light, the great anchor was slowly winched up, the chain protesting with a long, heavy creak, a kind of last farewell to the harbor. Kyle didn't go down to the dock. He stood at the second-floor tavern window and watched the ship glide away, carrying with it the dream of an era. No one on deck called out. The farewells had already been drunk the night before. The blessings were all in the looks they gave one another. Roger stood at the bow, broad and immovable as a mountain. Only when the ship had finished turning and was sinking toward the horizon did he, casually, as if making a small gesture, lift an arm and clench his fist toward the town. Kyle leaned on the window frame, raised his cup, and across the expanse of sea met that distant salute with his own. "Bon voyage, Captain," he murmured. Then he turned back to 2 troublesome patients. "Water. I want water. Treasure. It's all mine." Buggy writhed under his blanket like a maggot, face flushed, babbling nonsense. Shanks on the next bed looked a little better. At least he wasn't talking in his sleep anymore. He had twisted his blanket into a makeshift scabbard and clutched it to his chest. His brow knotted so tightly it looked like he was dreaming. He was locked in an earth-shattering duel with some unbeatable rival. Kyle sighed. In an instant, he'd gone from frontline fighter to full-time babysitter. He extended a finger. The tip vibrated almost imperceptibly. A cool, gentle breeze sprang up as if from nowhere and swept across their foreheads, taking some of the fever's heat with it. Shanks' fierce expression softened. Buggy's muttering about treasure stopped. He smacked his lips and sank into a deeper, more peaceful sleep. Over the next few days, Kyle experienced the dubious joys of looking after 2 sick kids. Their fevers came and went, and when they were awake, they were far more trouble than when they were delirious. "Brother Kyle, does my nose look bigger? Quick, check it," Buggy demanded, holding up a pocket mirror. Snot and tears streaked his face. "It has to be that red-haired bastard who did it to me." "Huh? What nonsense are you spouting?" Shanks snapped. He was weak, but his fighting spirit hadn't left him. He grabbed a pillow and hurled it. "You were the one who got sick first." "I don't care. My nose, my handsome nose," Buggy wailed, clutching his face. Kyle, the reluctant human mediator, sighed and stepped between them. "Brother Kyle, I want to practice my sword." Shanks fixed him with bright, feverish eyes. "I can swing while I'm lying down. Maybe I'll discover a new technique." "If you move again, I'll shove you through the ceiling," Kyle said flatly. That was all it took. Shanks went still. Keeping two stubborn, sick pirates from destroying the room required Kyle to get creative with his devil fruit powers. He ran short, regular scans with his perspective wave to check their vital signs and make sure nothing was developing into a lung infection, sparing them from Crocus's horrid, bitter herbal tonics. The scans were thorough enough that Buggy kept gasping and clutching his blanket, convinced he was being ogled, and howled, "Pervert," every time Kyle used the ability. Kyle even used the gentlest setting of his heat wave breath to warm their cold medicinal broths to the exact temperature. More than once, he managed to roast 2 sweet potatoes in the process. Between pillow fights, complaints about noses, and Kyle's reluctant ministrations, the days blurred into a chaotic routine. The 2 boys recovered slowly, from bedridden to walking, and then to running around town and making mischief again. Kyle was grateful for the calm. He would sit on the breakwater at the harbor and pass the time, coaxing a thin stream of water with tidal roar ripple to tease the fish, or bending sunlight with light illusion mirage to throw strange, flickering shadows against the wall and make the town's children laugh. He never regretted his choice. The bigger mysteries, the Whir, LD's End, the Will of D, the Void Century, were like an unread book on a high shelf. He knew it was there, full of temptation, but he enjoyed reaching for it and opening it on his own terms. Roger and his crew were the pioneers, the ones who would stamp an exclamation mark across the age. Kyle preferred to be a free reader, savoring the story at his own pace. The sky was perfectly clear that day. Outside town, in an open field, Shanks and Buggy were pestering him again under the guise of rehabilitation training. "Brother Kyle," they called. "My sword's already thirsty." Shanks yelled, swinging his wooden blade in a wide, confident arc. "My lord's throwing knives shouldn't be underestimated either." Buggy shot back, not about to be upstaged. Kyle grabbed both of the brats by the scruff of the neck and held them still, forcing them into temporary silence. At that moment, the beat of wings drew nearer. Caw, caw. A newsbird swooped down. More birds followed, circling and dropping broadsheets into the town square. The moment the papers hit the cobbles, the whole town erupted. "Extra! Extra! Oh my God, this is true! Incredible! The world's going to change! Did the Roger Pirates really pull it off?" The clamor rolled through the streets and beyond. News like this was setting off the same scenes everywhere. Shanks and Buggy stopped bickering and edged closer, curiosity winning out over rivalry. Kyle stood quiet, listening to the excited, scattered exclamations. Pirate Roger has completed an unprecedented circumnavigation of the globe. He reached the legendary final island. The ruler of this sea has finally appeared. He is the king of the sea, the Pirate King. When those last words reached his ears, Kyle couldn't keep the smile off his face. Kyle let out a slow breath, as if a weight he and the others had carried together had finally been set down. What rose in his chest was not the sting of missed opportunity, but a warm, overwhelming pride. Shanks and Buggy burst through the crowd like a pair of madmen, waving a newspaper between them. Brother Kyle, look!" Shanks cried, cheeks flushed, thrusting the paper forward and jabbing a finger at the massive headline. "Pirate King born. Gol D. Roger conquers the Grand Line." Beneath the headline was a photograph of Roger standing on the bow of the Oro Jackson, throwing back his head in that enormous laugh of his grin as wide and endless as the sea itself. "Captain, he really did it." Buggy's eyes were wet, his voice cracked with emotion, and yet he couldn't help the goofy, tearful smile that split his face. Kyle's eyes moved from the bold headline to the article underneath. The report confirmed it. The Roger Pirates had completed what everyone said was impossible, and the world would now recognize Gol D. Roger as the Pirate King. Roger, the Pirate King, had everything: wealth beyond imagining, fame that reached every corner of the world, and the power to shape history. The report said he had even named the final island, untouched for 800 years. Laughtail. Kyle murmured the name, letting it roll around in his mind. He could picture the moment perfectly. When they finally reached the end and looked upon the so-called treasure, Roger would have pointed at it all and laughed until he doubled over, tears running down his cheeks. Then, in that wild, unconcerned voice of his, he would have proclaimed to the world, This island shall be called Laugh-Tale. Kuha! Because the greatest treasure in the world, if it could even be called that, was itself a gigantic joke. It was so like him. Hey, Brother Kyle, why are you laughing too? Shanks asked, puzzled. Kyle tamped down his smile, ruffled the two kids' hair, and replied, Nothing. I just think Roger's laugh was the loudest thing in the whole world. He tilted his head and stared up into the distant sky, as if he could see through the clouds and watch that legendary ship coming home. Chapter 90. Return. The rise of the Pirate King swept across the world like a storm, pushing the tide of the era to an unprecedented high. A few days later, the familiar bow of a ship cut through the morning mist and quietly appeared on the horizon. Captain and the others are back! Shanks was the first to spot them. He dropped the wooden sword at his side and sprinted for the harbor. Hey, wait up, you red-headed bastard! Buggy shouted, close on his heels, not wanting to be left behind. Kyle followed at a more leisurely pace, watching the Oro Jackson glide toward the shore. He studied the faces aboard, tired, yes, but lit by an indescribable radiance, the kind that only comes to those who have finally reached the shores of their dreams. The whole port erupted. Townspeople poured out to watch the legendary ship ease into harbor. When the gangplank hit the pier, a crowd surged down it. Kyle, you really missed something incredible, you scoundrel! Jabba's booming voice was the first to reach him. The big man grabbed Kyle in a crushing bear hug. Ha! Are you kids feeling better? Where's Captain? Someone asked, scanning the deck. The dock buzzed with excitement as the crew came ashore, young Shanks and Buggy among them. People pressed in, laughing and swapping stories. Captain Roger was the last to step down. He paused, looking toward the two boys with an easy smile and a slow, no nod, before the rest of the crew began to file past. Laughter and shouts from the deck mixed with the jubilation on the pier. Sailors and townspeople alike compared the strange seashells they'd brought back from Laugh-Tale, pointed at their photos in the newspapers, and emptied glass after glass of celebratory rum. It was a noisy, bright scene of homecoming. Kyle kept to the edge of it all. He didn't join the crowd. Instead, he leaned against a stack of cargo boxes and watched. His gaze drifted through the swirl of bodies and landed on a quieter corner of the pier. Roger had slipped away and was standing at the very end, looking out over the sea. Shanks spotted him and darted over, talking a mile a minute. The younger man's questions came in a rush. Roger answered with patient smiles and steady words. Around them, the celebration continued, but an almost invisible wall seemed to set that pair apart, their conversation wrapped in its own small silence. Kyle couldn't make out what they were saying, and he had no intention of using his abilities to eavesdrop. That wasn't his place. He simply watched as the two figures stood at the water's edge, the rest of the world a little louder and a little farther away. Kyle only saw Shanks's shoulders begin to tremble. The young man who always had "I'll surpass the captain" on his lips suddenly threw himself into Roger's arms and wept openly. Roger smiled and patted Shanks's back with a gentleness that contradicted the hand that had once gripped the world, now quietly full of fatherly tenderness. No one else in the crowd noticed. They were lost in the euphoria of having conquered the Grand Line. Kyle, however, couldn't help a soft sigh. Roger held a crumpled newspaper and laughed until tears stood in his eyes. Ha! Look at this, he roared. Pirate King Gol D Roger, owner of the whole world. I like the sound of that. Yeah, now every kid on the map's going to want to come to sea and give us trouble, a crewman shouted, his cheeks flushed as he waved a wine bottle. The world government must have a splitting headache over this. The Marines have probably already started moving. Garp's grinding his teeth and cursing us right now, another voice added. Rayleigh, leaning against the mast, wiped his sword with slow, lazy motions and watched the crew with a small smile. Laughter, shouting, and the clink of bottles filled the deck, a ship buoyed by victory and the careless joy of pirates who had just tasted the world. There's one thing they got wrong, Roger said, tapping the bold name on the newspaper. Gold Roger. It's Gol D Roger. Koo-ha-ha, he corrected, laughing. Rayleigh pushed his glass, says up the bridge of his nose, the lamplight catching in the lenses. As expected, he said quietly, the world government wants to wipe the D clean from your name. They had reached their destination, and uncovered the true history. Now they understood more than ever the weight carried by that single letter. Roger casually tossed the paper into the sea breeze and watched it flutter away. He let his gaze travel around the deck, pausing on the faces of the comrades who had shared his life and death moments, Rayleigh, Jabba, Odin, sweeping across every crew member before finally resting on Kyle and the two youngsters who had just rejoined them. Speaking of which, his voice softened until it was almost shy. Looking back on this journey, it all feels like a miracle. I, who was told long ago that I didn't have much time left, have come this far. Truly, I am endlessly grateful to all of you. A hush fell over the deck. The crew exchanged uncertain looks, taken aback by Roger's sudden solemnity. Hey, what are you going on about? Jabba was the first to break the hush, waving his hand awkwardly. Why are you getting all serious, you old bastard of a captain? Yeah, you're giving me the creeps. Say something like that out of the blue. Have you been hitting the bottle, idiot? Ha ha! The captain actually said thank you. What's next, the sun rising in the west? They answered their captain's gratitude in their usual rough, sincere way. Roger looked up at the noisy band of men. A smile returned to his face, but there was something different about it now, an edge to the warmth. The last rays of the setting sun slid toward the horizon, turning the sky and sea a magnificent reddish gold. The shadow of the Oro Jackson stretched long across the water, like the silhouette of an era. The breeze died. The laughter and shouting faded. Everyone seemed to feel it at once and fell silent, turning to their captain. Roger straightened, smoothed his coat, and drew a long, steady breath. His voice carried cleanly to every corner of the deck and landed in every heart. Roger Pirates, disband! Chapter 91. Roger Pirates, disband! Hey, what's this supposed to mean? Jabba was the first to break the stunned silence. You only just became Pirate King, and now you're throwing us, your own crew, out on our ears? That's cold. Yeah, I still haven't got my share to open a tavern, another shouted, forcing a laugh that never reached his eyes. And I haven't even saved up for the 10 wives I had planned. You idiot, Captain. Are you drunk or something? The deck erupted again, noisy and overheard, but the bravado was gone. Their shouts were loud but hollow. Each outrageous complaint, a clumsy attempt to paper over something deeper. They barked jokes and boasts as if volume could fill the hole in their chests. Red-rimmed eyes and fake casual postures betrayed them. They were putting on a show for themselves as much as for Roger. Roger watched them all without saying another word. He took in their forced merriment, their thinly veiled hurt, then let his signature grin spread across his face. Wordlessly, he heaved up a barrel of sake and laughed, booming and easy. Ha ha! Then let's drink! Before we all go our separate ways, one last drink with me, your stingy captain. Now that's more like it. Cheers! Cups clinked, sake foamed and splashed, and for a moment the noise and warmth filled the Oro Jackson. Still, everyone felt it. This ship, this home, was on its final countdown. The return voyage stretched on like a long goodbye. The Oro Jackson no longer raced toward a clear destination as it had on the way out. She moved slow and unhurried now, like an old man lingering to say farewell to each of his children. The next morning, the sea was still wrapped in fog. Roger stepped out of the cabin with a small pack slung over his shoulder, as if he were only taking a short stroll. He walked straight to where Shanks stood. The boy lowered his head. His mouth was tightly shut. He seemed to have 1,000 things to say, and not a single one would come out. Roger looked at him and suddenly smiled. He untied the straw hat that had hung from his neck, the hat that had been with him through countless storms, and placed it gently on Shanks's vivid red hair. This is for you. The hat was a little too big, slipping down until it shaded and almost covered Shanks's eyes. The boy shook so badly his whole body quivered. He reached out and clenched the straw hat's brim with both hands. "This is our important promise, Shanks," he said. Shanks didn't reply with words. He only nodded, hard, his shoulders trembling as if he might fall apart. Buggy watched them from a short distance, mouth tight, envy plain in his eyes. He balled his fists, turned his head away, crossed his arms, and muttered under his breath, "Humph! It's only a straw hat. What's so special about it? I, the great Buggy, don't need something so sentimental." He kept telling himself the captain must have given his best things to those he cared for most, that red-haired bastard was just a favorite, and that he, Buggy, was the one born to rule the seas, so he didn't need to be soft about trinkets. Just as he was starting to believe his own excuses, Roger slapped his forehead. Ah, right. I almost forgot. He turned around. Under Buggy's astonished stare, he produced something from his cloak, an old-looking dagger, its scabbard fashioned from the hide of some deep-sea creature. A small gem was set into the hilt. Even unsheathed, the blade gave off a restrained, keen presence, quiet but undeniably sharp. "This is for you, Buggy." Roger pressed the dagger into Buggy's arms. "I've been infusing this blade with hockey for a long time. It's razor-sharp. For picking your teeth, cough, or for springing on someone, it's perfect. Koo-ha! Fits you, doesn't it?" Buggy stared at the faintly warm dagger, frozen in place. He could tell it wasn't an ordinary blade. Roger's powerful hockey still clung to it. "Who wants your junk, Captain?" he blurted, his face as red as his nose, yet his mouth stayed stubborn. "My flying knives are the best. This little toy. I'll key it, all right. Don't get the wrong idea." He awkwardly hugged the dagger to his chest like a prize while muttering, "What a nuisance." His gruff show of embarrassment eased the heavy mood on deck. Roger laughed and went around the crew, clapping shoulders as he went. "Rayleigh, I'm counting on you from now on." "Ah, don't worry," Rayleigh replied. Pluton pushed his glasses up. His gaze behind the lenses was steady as ever. Roger turned to the others. "And you, don't give me any more trouble. Jabba, ease up on the sock. Be careful you don't actually end up dying in a sake barrel one day. No one will even collect your corpse then." "Bastard, worry about yourself." Jabba shot back, his eyes rimmed in angry red. "Even if I go, I'll take a few admirals with me. Don't you dare die in such a pathetic way." He fell silent for a moment, then turned to Kyle. "Kyle, thank you," he said quietly. "Even though we couldn't finish this together, without you, we never would have gotten this far." Kyle's mouth moved, and finally he managed only a few words. "Bon voyage, Captain." Roger simply nodded and said nothing more. He turned, walked down the gangplank, and set foot ashore. From the ship, the crew called after him in their usual rough fashion. "Hey, Captain, pirates don't cry. Don't you dare wipe away tears in secret." "Exactly. If you cry, you won't be the pirate king anymore. Get lost, you bastard, Captain." Shouts, whistles, and laughter collided and rolled across the harbor. They were the gentlest of farewells, spoken in the rudest of tones. Everyone shouted, "The Roger pirates never shed tears." Yet whose eyes weren't red? Whose voice wasn't thick with feeling? Rayleigh took off his glasses and scrubbed them hard, as if trying to clear some stubborn, invisible mist. Jabba tilted his head back and downed a huge gulp of sake. The spicy liquid burned his throat, but he kept the tears in his eyes from falling. Shanks pulled his straw hat lower. Tears pooled on the brim and dripped onto the deck. Buggy clutched the dagger to his chest and sobbed like a child, snot and tears streaking his face. Roger's steps never wavered. He kept walking, step by step, away from the ship he had lived on, away from the comrades he called family. Only when he reached the end of the pier, just as he was about to round the corner and disappear from sight, did he stop. Turning so his back faced the Oro Jackson and his crew, he raised his left hand and clenched his fist high. The silhouette of the Pirate King was as imposing as ever, as if he could hold up the sky. No one could tell what expression he wore as he turned his back on the world. 92. Goodbye, Oro Jackson. The second man to step down from the Oro Jackson was Kozuki Oden. The boisterous daimyo from Wano stood on the dock with Amino Habakiri and Enma at his waist, a simple, honest smile on his face that seemed to brighten the gray morning. "Everyone, this is where we part ways," Oden declared, bowing deeply to the ship's crew. "It has been the greatest honor of my life, Kozuki Oden, to have sailed with all of you." "Oden-san!" Shouts came from the gangplank. Two half-grown boys, Shanks and Buggy, rushed forward with eyes reddened by emotion. One flung his arms around Oden's left leg, the other clung to his right. "Are you sure you'll be all right going back by yourself?" they pleaded. Rayleigh's face darkened. "The situation in Wano, it isn't the same as when he left," he said quietly. Everyone knew the truth. Kurazumi Orochi had seized power, allied himself with foreign forces, and turned that once beautiful land of cherry blossoms into a place of danger and shadow. Oden only laughed, a booming, unapologetic sound that chased away some of the worry in the air. Ha! No worries. He waved a hand as if dismissing a fly. Mere trifles, hardly worth mentioning. When crew members offered to send men with him or to wait and see, Odin refused each offer, smiling all the while. There was a stubborn light in his eyes, the straightforward, stubborn pride of a samurai who believed his path was his alone. He believed he could set things right, bring light back to Wano country. Kyle watched Odin walk away. Odin's personality was almost simple to the point of foolishness, and that only made Kyle's imagination darker. A cauldron of boiling oil, a lone figure trying to shield his retainers, gunfire ripping through Wano. The tragedy was already written, and the protagonist was stepping onto the stage full of hope. As Odin started to turn away, Kyle called after him. Odin. Odin paused and turned, confusion on his face. Kyle's voice was calm, his eyes earnest. The samurai way of Wano can be too rigid, he said. You can't deal with lawless jackals by clinging to samurai formalities. He let the words hang for a moment, then his gaze sharpened. Constant concessions only embolden them. Escalation follows compromise. Sometimes struggle is the only way out. Those sentences, delivered without context, left the others baffled. Odin froze, scratching his head, puzzling over the lines as if trying to chew them into meaning. He didn't fully grasp the depth behind Kyle's words, but he trusted his comrade. Slowly, solemnly, he nodded. Kyle-san, I'll remember them, he called, grinning to show a mouthful of white teeth. Thank you. Well then, everyone, until we meet again. He turned and strode off, shoulders squared, every step sure. Another tearful parting. The Oro Jackson weighed anchor and sailed on, but the easy laughter and reckless joy it once carried would never return to quite the same way again. When they reached the Sabaody archipelago, Rayleigh prepared to get off. He changed into a simple, unadorned outfit. The only thing left at his waist was his sword. Well then, he said, adjusting his glasses with his usual steady tone, this is where I get off. Oh. Shanks drawled the sound and flashed a roguish smile. Mr. Rayleigh, heading to Sabaody? Going to see someone special? Buggy straightened, hands on his hips, and snapped, Humph, he's definitely going to see that bar owner. I saw it last time. Rayleigh was staring at her forever. Ha ha! Shaki charges a fortune for her drinks, Rayleigh. Do you have any secret savings hidden away? Jabba leaned on the rail and gleefully aired his old friend's supposed weakness. Hey, you guys. A small, cross-shaped vein popped up on Rayleigh's forehead. Even the usually unflappable man couldn't stay calm now. What nonsense are you spouting? I just want to live out my quiet retirement here. Kyle leaned in nearby, watching the flush rise in Rayleigh's face. A smile tugged at his lips. He said nothing, but the teasing in his eyes was sharper than any taunt. That was what maddened Rayleigh the most. All right, I'm going. Rayleigh practically bolted, waving one hand as he hurried off the ship and jumped ashore without looking back. As the vice captain's rumpled back receded, a laugh the crew had been holding in finally broke out across the deck, cutting through the heaviness of farewells. The voyage went on. At every port, men left the ship. One by one they disembarked, each departure marked by another goodbye. The deck that had once held dozens grew steadily emptier. Boisterous shouts, rough laughter, hearty curses, and rollicking songs faded little by little, until all that remained was the flapping of the sails and an almost complete silence. At last, the Oro Jackson slipped into a tiny, unnamed island port. It wasn't a bustling harbor, just an ordinary stopping place in the Grand Line. So ordinary, in fact, that it didn't even appear on the sea charts. Jabba slung his massive battle axe over his shoulder, the blade flashing cold in the sunlight. Kyle carried his naginata the way he always had, a plain satchel tied to the hilt. They were two of the original Roger pirates, and now, at the end of their own journey, they had decided to leave together. Shanks and Buggy stood before them, eyes red but determined not to cry. After one farewell after another, they were almost numb, yet the empty place in their chests only seemed to grow. Jabba grinned and clapped a heavy hand on each of their shoulders. Hey, you two, he said. The future's in your hands. Don't bring shame on the Roger pirates. Kyle stepped forward and put his hands on the boy's shoulders more gently. Don't look so down, he said. Save your tears for the day you meet again. He looked at Shanks, then over at Buggy. Your voyage is only beginning. Don't disgrace your teacher, and don't disgrace your captain. And if you get into trouble out there, don't go dragging our names through it. When I have time, I'll come find you." He pulled his hands back, curled them into fists, and smiled. "If I find your training slipped by then, don't blame me for being merciless." A faint, nearly invisible halo of air gathered around his knuckles as he lightly tapped fists with Shanks and Buggy. "Kyle," Shanks looked up, eyes heavy with reluctance. "Humph. Who'd ever fall behind in training?" Buggy rubbed his nose stubbornly. "This great me will become someone who surpasses Captain Roger and claims all the world's treasures." Kyle and Jabba exchanged smiles, and the weight of parting eased a little. Without looking back, they turned and walked down the gangplank, just as they had 100 times before when going ashore for supplies. The anchor of the Oro Jackson was hauled up again, the few remaining crew members aboard, and the 2 young men who would one day shake the world slowly sailed out of the harbor. The ship dwindled into a speck on the horizon until it was nothing but a black dot. The once bustling Oro Jackson fell eerily silent. Shanks sat alone on the ship's figurehead, staring down at the straw hat cupped in his hands. The wind tugged at his coat, but he hardly seemed to notice. His eyes were fixed on the worn brim, as if trying to read something there no one else could. In the dim aft cabin, Buggy pressed himself into a shadowed corner, clutching the dagger Roger had given him. He hugged it to his chest like a talisman, shoulders trembling with each shallow breath. All around them, the legendary ship kept its steady course, laden with 1,000 dreams and buried glories, cutting through the sea as if toward the close of an era. Silence settled over the deck, heavy with the weight of what had been and what was coming. Chapter 93. Parting. A salty sea breeze swept across the dock. The Oro Jackson's silhouette had vanished on the horizon, swallowed by the boundless blue. Only Kyle and Jabba remained on the planks, their long, solitary reflections wavering in the water beneath them. The deafening clamor and farewells that had filled the air minutes ago had fallen away, leaving only the steady, endless thud of waves against the pilings, like the pulse of time itself, beating against an empty heart. "They're gone." Jabba's voice was hoarse. His face was unreadable behind dark sunglasses, and the giant axe balanced on his shoulder seemed heavier than usual. "Yeah," Kyle answered, his gaze fixed on the empty expanse of sea. The home they'd known for decades had been scattered in an instant. The feast they had thought would never end had at last come to its conclusion. They stood that way for a long while, saying nothing, until the sun climbed overhead and baked the wooden boards beneath their feet. Jabba was the first to turn, breaking the stifling silence. "Let's go get a drink." "All right." The town was small and a little rundown, and the tavern was even worse for wear. When they pushed open the creaking wooden door, a wave of stale smells hit them, a mix of cheap ale, sweat, and frying food. The place was alive with noise, gamblers cursing, drunkards babbling, and the landlady shouting herself hoarse. The rowdy clamor was a sharp contrast to the deathly quiet on the dock moments before. They slid into a shadowy corner and ordered 2 large mugs of the cheapest ale. A coarse head of foam floated on the golden liquid. Jabba hoisted his mug, drained a gulp, then slammed it down hard on the table with a thud. "Pah! This ale's terrible," he grunted. Kyle merely smiled, lifted his own mug, and took a careful sip. He frowned, then said nothing. His gaze drifted across the room, townsfolk with flushed faces squabbling over a few berries, vagrants passed out with their heads on the tables. There was a soft, distant look in his eyes. After all, they had once dominated the greatest sea routes, learned the world's hidden truths, and stood toe-to-toe with its most powerful forces. Now they sat here, listening to the tavern's rough chorus, as if the whole world had shrunk to this one noisy room. They sat there now, sharing the cheapest wine like 2 ordinary men unsure of where to go next. Jabba drained another mouthful, wiped the foam from his lips with the back of his hand, and looked at Kyle. "So, Kyle," he asked, "where are you headed then? Where to go?" When Roger was still aboard, nobody ever bothered with that question. The Oro Jackson provided their direction, and Roger's laugh was all the rallying call they ever needed. Now that laugh was gone. The ship had sailed on to its destination and left the crew on the shore, adrift like rootless duckweed. Kyle turned his wineglass in his hand and watched the liquid slosh against the glass. He did not answer at once. It's been decades, Jabba went on, half to himself, a rare note of confusion in his voice. We followed the captain. Every day was fighting, sleeping, feasting. Now we're suddenly idle, and the stillness aches through me. He cracked his knuckles, his fists clenching until his knuckles popped. A fierce light returned to his eyes. I hear there's a place on the other side of the world called Elbaf, he said quietly, a land where giants are born warriors. I want to go see for myself, see whether their fists are harder or my axe is sharper. Cough, cough. Elbaf? That's a fine place to go, Kyle said, nodding. Have a good time. Just don't end up getting mistaken for some roadside nobody. Ha ha! Who knows who's the roadside nobody? Jabba roared, laughter clearing the last of the gloom from his chest. He slapped his knee and kept going. What about you? You're the one with all the tricks. You must have already picked a place to go and a way to enjoy yourself, right? Kyle let his mind run through the others. Roger would head to Batarilla Island in the South Blue, set Lee down with Portgas D. Rouge, and live quietly. Rayleigh would disappear to Saboti, work as a coding craftsman, and spend his days with Shaki. Jabba would go spelunking until he earned the title of the world's strongest man. One by one, they'd had enough of the road and were returning to family life. So that left him, the perennial old bachelor. Kyle felt the urge to throw something in frustration, but he forced himself to calm down. He pushed the wild thoughts back and let his gaze drift out the window across the boundless sea. Me? He drawled, a crooked smile tugging at his lips. I'll probably just keep wandering the Grand Line. He paused, his voice dropped, as if he were speaking to himself. That bastard Roger's illness. I want to keep looking, just in case. Miracles turn up in the strangest corners of the world. Jabba's laughter died away. He watched Kyle, lips moving as if to speak, then shrugged and drained the last of his wine. And then, Kyle's eyes flashed with mischief. Then, he echoed. Then I'll find some fun. The sea's enormous. There are always a few greenhorns who don't know their place, and somebody's got to teach them the rules of the ocean. He flicked a finger against the tabletop as he spoke. At the next table, a burly drunk was in the middle of a boast. He gestured wildly, sent his mug tipping, and ale ran across the bench. Just as the liquid was about to spill onto the floor, the puddle hesitated. Then, as if it had a mind of its own, it gathered itself into a thin stream, snaked along the edge of the table, and landed neatly back in the big man's open mouth. Burp! He belched loudly, wiped his lips, and blinked at the empty table and his wet beard, completely oblivious to what had just happened. Pfft! Jabba nearly spat out his drink watching it, but the laugh bubbled out of him anyway. You're still as mischievous as ever. Waste is a shame, right? Besides, the one it belongs to doesn't seem to mind, the big man replied with a grin. The small prank washed away the tension in the tavern. The two of them kept drinking mug after mug, as if they were back on the deck of the Oro Jackson, tossing back ale under the endless night sky and the rolling sea. By the time they finally stopped, dusk was settling in. They stepped out into the town and stood at the only crossroads. One road ran down to the dock, the other led inland across the island. Well then, this is goodbye, Jabba said, slinging his enormous axe back over his shoulder. His face had settled into its usual bold, unruly swagger. Kyle nodded once. There were no more words, no hugs, no lingering looks. Jabba offered his big, calloused fist. Kyle met it with his own. Their weathered knuckles met with a dull thud. Short and strong, like a heartbeat. Don't die, you bastard, Jabba grunted. You too, you idiot, Kyle shot back. They shared a brief smile, then turned and went their separate ways. One walked toward the dock, ready for new storms and fresh battles. The other slipped inland, his silhouette swallowed by the jungle path and the gathering twilight. Neither a pirate's farewell, blunt, brief, and always like this. Chapter 94. Organize Your Thoughts. After parting ways with Jabba, Kale bought a small boat in a port town. It was an odd little craft, long and narrow, its hull painted matte black, a tiny black sail mounted on the stern, and a single seat that looked more like a high-backed throne than anything seaworthy. Kale climbed into that throne and sat like a king, letting the current take him where it pleased. When it comes to showing off, I, Kale, declare you the strongest. He thought with a wry smile. This, he decided, would be a fitting ship for Hawkeye Mihawk. The style suited his mood perfectly. Recently unemployed, a little lost, and oddly proud of it. The ocean was an endless blue cage, and at the same time the freest of battlefields. Leaving behind the mighty, bustling Oro Jackson for a one-man boat felt like stepping into a different world, but Cale wasn't troubled by the disparity. The extreme quiet calmed him. After the bittersweet farewell, his heart slowly began to settle. He leaned back in the throne-like seat, legs crossed, his naginata resting across his lap. Eyes closed, he let his thoughts fan out and slowly come into order. He had always been the sort of man who planned before he acted. Now, with a rare moment to himself, Cale sat back and took stock, inventorying his strengths, tallying his options, and sketching the path forward. He had come a long way since the days when he was the island's wild card, a reckless fighter who answered only to the call of battle. Following Roger through one engagement after another had tempered him. Commodore, Vice Admiral, First Mate, Admiral, each step a harder lesson. Experience, victories, and losses had carved him into something different. His power no longer came from brute fury. It was honed, measured, dependable. In their world, that kind of strength was rare. He started with the obvious, his body. Over the decades, Cale had never bulked up the way Nozdon and others did, drilling his muscles until they were hulking and obvious. His method had always been subtler. With the boba fruit, he could kindle and channel tiny bioelectrical currents through himself, continually stimulating and refining every cell, every muscle fiber, every nerve ending. It was an internal smithing, a slow, precise tempering that left no weakness ignored. That process had pushed his physical limits to a hard bottleneck long ago. Beyond that barrier lay only the sort of transcendence legends talked about, breaking his limiter in some miraculous, almost absurd way, like Saitama the Great Demon King did in the old stories. Cale didn't expect to summon some cartoonish night guy and blast the Gorosei's dog heads off. He wasn't chasing that kind of spectacle. His physical combat was more than sufficient, reliable, efficient, lethal when it needed to be. And then there was his devil fruit. He let the thought hang there because unlike his bodily training, the fruit's potential felt less defined, more a field of possibility than a finished tool. If his body had reached a plateau, perhaps the fruit could offer the angle he still lacked. This was his greatest treasure, the seed of everything he might yet become. Cale let his fingertips slide along the cold edge of his naginata and thought about the word waves. Sound waves, light waves, electromagnetic waves, shock waves, even gravitational waves. 1,000 techniques flashed through his mind. What would happen once he awakened? He found himself smiling without meaning to. If he could turn everything around him into a medium for waves, make the ground roll like an ocean, make the air hum and vibrate like a taut string, such power would be nothing short of godlike. But waves were only part of the equation. Hockey stood beside them. As a veteran of the Roger Pirates, Cale treated the three forms of hockey as basic tools of survival. Living and fighting alongside world-class users like Roger and Rayleigh had tempered his own hockey to a high polish. He had mastered advanced techniques, from Odin's Ryuo to Roger's method of coding attacks with C, Enquirer's hockey. A note he had tucked away in his journal read, in neat, urgent handwriting, "Study this well. Study whenever you have time, Nick and Jen." The lessons stuck with him. Kaido's blunt maxim, "Only hockey reigns supreme," ran through his head as a warning and a challenge. Even Eustace Kid, who amused himself with tinkering and playing with Gundam-like machines, had proved time and again to be a fearsome opponent. Toys or no toys, strength answered to steel and spirit. Cale sheathed the naginata and breathed in. Waves, hockey, study, those were the paths before him. He would need them all. His awakened electromagnetic cannon could seriously wound a Four-Emperor with little effort. One shot would clear the area with a massive territory-wide blast. The problem was hockey. His hockey lagged behind, and his wind-up took too long. Shanks treated him like a nobody. It was embarrassing to admit, but life aboard the Roger Pirates had been too comfortable. The fighters on that ship were all stronger, more ruthless than he was. Roger would bellow, "Can't let our crew get hurt," and charge straight to the front to unleash god avoidance. Jabba swung his twin axes in endless, brutal arcs. Later, Kozuki Odin joined them. Each of those men could literally punch a hole through the sky. Cale's role was smaller. plug gaps, step in where needed, and once in a while fire a huge area of effect blast to clear the field. He rarely got the chance to use his full power. Most days he sunbathed on the deck with a glass of orange juice, loafed around, or experimented with new applications for his devil fruit ability. Thinking of that easy life, Cale reached into his bag and drew out a somewhat crumpled wanted poster.
Aaron live.
The wanted poster showed him propped against the railing of the Oro Jackson, half asleep and lazily yawning. 2.1 billion, Cale muttered, staring at the number and pouting. The world government really underestimates me, but given how often I slack off and the current inflation, I suppose it's fair. He flicked the poster away, letting the sea breeze take it. It spiraled down and disappeared into the deep blue. He drifted like that for days, doing little more than letting the ocean carry him. One afternoon a news coup wheeled overhead and squawked. Cale flicked his finger. A few berries sailed perfectly into the bird's pouch. In return, the coup dropped a newspaper into his lap. The front page was all about the Roger Pirates' disbandment. Every headline screamed speculation, casting the vanished crew as devils and hinting at some even greater conspiracy. The prose was heavy with foreboding and a thinly veiled relish for their downfall. Cale snorted, turned the paper over and scanned the back. An otherwise forgettable item tucked away in a corner caught his eye. The Marine hero Vice Admiral Garp has once again refused promotion to Admiral, the paper read. Reports say his son, Monkey D. Dragon, has left the Marines, espouses dangerous ideologies, and his whereabouts are unknown. Dragon, huh? Cale's eyes flickered. He remembered the young man he'd met once in God Valley, the fire that had burned in his gaze. It looked as if the embers of a future revolution had already begun to smolder. He flipped on. The rest of the paper was a catalog of pirate atrocities, burnings, murders, pillaging. The world, the headlines insisted, was as chaotic as ever. Cale sighed, balled the paper in his hand, and with a casual flick sent it arcing away. Just before it could fall into the sea, an invisible shockwave shattered it into fine dust that scattered on the wind. He stretched, rose from his seat, and crossed the deck to the bow. Roger's illness, he murmured, staring at the horizon. Hope is slim, but I have to try. It wasn't only for Roger, it was a reason to keep moving, to give some direction to his own aimless voyage. After all, the ocean had a way of hiding miracles in its most unexpected corners. For Cale, the true voyage had only just begun. In this era, don't let me get too bored, he said, a soft laugh drifting away on the endless sea breeze. 95. Mysterious hooded man. Kyle walked the cobbled streets of the harbor town, breathing in a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. This place sat well away from the heart of the Grand Line. No marine bases, no infamous pirate crews, just salt air, wooden piers, and the easy rhythm of a small port. Sea breeze blended with the smell of roasting fish. Vendors shouted their wares, children laughed, and the whole scene came together into a calming urban symphony. His taut nerves loosened. In his hand was a freshly bought skewer of grilled fish, skin golden and crisp, dusted with fine spices, while the flesh inside remained tender and juicy. The edges were a little charred, but each chew released more flavor. He ate slowly, like an ordinary tourist, taking in the storefronts and the people going about their day. No cannon fire thundered in the distance, no enemies demanded calculation, no routes needed conquering. Just Kyle, a traveler enjoying local customs and the simplest, truest taste of the town. "Boss, another skewer," he called to a nearby vendor, casually tossing over a few berries. Just as he raised the second steaming skewer of roasted fish to his lips and prepared to continue his leisurely walk, his steps faltered without him realizing why. Something felt off. A faint gaze, like a shadow that wouldn't let go, was fixed on him from behind. It was an odd look, no idle curiosity of a passerby, and none of the blatant greed or malice you'd expect from pirates or bounty hunters. Ordinary prying eyes never slipped past his masterful observation hockey. But this time the opponent's concealment was unusually subtle. Their presence was almost entirely suppressed. If not for his magnetic sense vision, a knack he'd honed with his devil fruit to detect the tiniest distortions in living beings, magnetic fields, he might easily have missed it. A tall man in a dark green hooded cloak stood mostly hidden in the shadows, only a stubborn chin exposed. He was pretending to rummage at a stall selling cheap trinkets, seashell necklaces and the like, but his attention was clearly elsewhere. Sk! Troublesome, Kyle muttered inwardly, though his face kept the bored tourist expression as he slowly chewed his roasted fish. Kyle's mind raced as he ran through possible suspects. World government lackeys? CP operatives? Unlikely. Their MO favored one-hit assassinations, not this kind of tailing that hovered neither too far nor too close. This felt more like a test, an observation. A bounty hunter? Even less likely. He almost laughed. The last fool who'd tried to take him probably already had 3 feet of dirt over him. He glanced at the children playing on the street corner and frowned. Whoever was following him, this was no place to make a move. With that decided, he finished the roasted fish in 3 quick bites. The bare bamboo skewer twirled between his fingers, whispering through the air. Then he changed direction and ambled toward the town's quieter outskirts. He strolled through the crowded central square, past the last scattered houses, and watched the cobblestones underfoot give way to a rutted dirt track. The human hubbub faded, replaced by wind in the trees and birdsong, the world seeming to fall suddenly and peacefully quiet. Kyle felt it before he saw it. The man in the hood behind him was hesitating. It was only a tiny, almost imperceptible pause. But it was enough. Not the hesitation of a killer. No, a murderer wouldn't flinch. Nor was it the impatience of a hothead who would have already charged in. This was the slow, measured hesitation of a tracker who thought things through. Was he unsure? Or merely waiting for the perfect opening? He didn't retreat. He kept coming, cautious but deliberate. Kyle braced himself. Get ready to meet my lion's fang, he thought. The hooded man finally stopped in a rough clearing ringed by fractured cliffs. Behind him a sheer rock wall rose up. Below, the sea thrashed and roared. It was a stomping ground and a staging ground both, a good place for a conversation. Kyle froze and pivoted slowly. Oh, face him. The instant he turned, the figure in the shadow of the hood reacted. His pupils shrank to pinpricks. Kyle was gone, not a blur, not a streak or an afterimage. One heartbeat he was there. The next he had simply vanished, as if smoke had been blown aside. A cold, electric prickling skittered over the hooded man's scalp. Instinct flared. Raw, immediate alarm that cut off rational thought. The hooded man blurred into a gust of wind and began to retreat. His reflexes were lightning fast. He twisted away almost the instant Kyle struck. He was quick, but Kyle was quicker. A faint wish of displaced air cut the twilight. The fleeing gust halted mid-escape, as if gripped by an enormous invisible hand, and was forced to snap back into a stumbling human form. From nowhere, a thin spike slid into place, its tip pressing with deadly precision against his Adam's apple. It wasn't a knife or a sword. It was a bamboo skewer, the sort that had just held a grilled fish, now ink-black and as hard as steel, its shaft sheathed in a dense layer of armament hockey. The point rested steady and unyielding, a hair's breadth of pressure, and it would pierce his throat. A cold, murderous intent seemed to pour off the tip, making every hair on the hooded man's body rise. As his cloak fluttered back, the hood fell away to reveal a young face, lined by hardship and set with grim determination, lit by the last glow of the setting sun. The dark red checkerboard tattoo on his left cheek caught the golden light and looked almost alive. The man who had arrived was the revolutionary who would one day set the world ablaze, the legendary Monkey D. Dragon. Kyle stared at the familiar yet strange face, an eyebrow lifting in mild curiosity. The tattoo seemed like a brand, a mark that stirred something in him. Oh, it's you. Kyle plucked the bamboo toothpick from his mouth and flicked it away, as if their previous life-or-death standoff had never occurred. Former Marine Monkey D. Dragon, he said with a teasing lilt. What can I do for you? Kyle's calm face was mirrored in Dragon's pupils. Dragon swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbed. Kyle had backed off the hockey that had been sharp enough to pierce steel, but a subtle pressure still pressed down on him like an invisible gravity. Even standing there, almost idly, the man in front of him felt like the center of the sea, of the world itself. Former Marine, Dragon's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. Mr. Kyle, don't toy with me. Kyle broke into a grin that flashed white teeth, amusement and mischief in it. Good memory, little dragon. He stepped closer and, as if it were the most natural thing, reached out and patted the green cloak at Dragon's shoulders, which had gone a bit stiff in the sea breeze. "How's Garp doing these days? And you, what, have you finally decided to try and bring me, this wretched pirate, to justice all by yourself?" Dragon stiffened immediately. A flush of embarrassment passed over his face. Dragon had once ridden with the old man Garp in the chase after the Roger pirates, and by chance he'd been drawn in by Kyle's conversation and knowledge. The two became acquaintances, and Kyle took a liking to the passionate, optimistic young man, so much so that he gave Dragon private guidance in his training. At first, Dragon refused. His father had taught him the supreme, invincible hammer warship training method, and he wasn't eager to betray that. But after listening to only a few sentences from Kyle, he was stunned. Kyle was a gift for anyone who wanted to improve, an invaluable teacher. In Dragon's eyes, Kyle lacked the usual brutality and greed of pirates. He seemed more like a world-weary hermit who had seen everything and grown bored, only occasionally baring his fangs to remind people he was still the kind of monster who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Roger and Rayleigh. Dragon said nothing in answer to Kyle's teasing. He stared past him at the churning sea, his expression complex and unreadable. Kyle met that look and from it understood. He remembered it clearly, years ago in God Valley, a young man in a still new Marine uniform, his face twisted with equal parts anger and bewilderment when he watched the celestial dragons amuse themselves by butchering slaves. The fire in those eyes was not Garp's fire, the kind that burns for justice. Dragon's flame was different, a destructive blaze that wanted to raze whatever was rotten to the ground. Maybe that day in God Valley had been the first spark. Shh! Kyle clicked his tongue and, with a casual sweep of his arm, hooked Dragon by the neck as if in friendly jest. "Say what's on your mind. Who are you sneaking around me for? Who do you think you're fooling?" Dragon's cheek twitched. A bead of sweat formed as he forced the words out through gritted teeth. "I'm not." He tried to wrench free, but Kyle's arm was like an iron hoop, seemingly relaxed, but holding a terrifying, immovable strength. It made Dragon's heart skip, and he silently revised his estimate of the man's power. "No, damn it." Kyle chuckled without much concern as he half-dragged Dragon toward town. "Who are you trying to show that tragic lost look to? I saw the reports. Deserted the Marines, dangerous ideology, whereabouts unknown. Not bad for a rating. Planning to raise a flag and start a rebellion next? Make Garp have a stroke?" He sounded like he was sweet-talking. Dragon stopped dead. He looked up suddenly, eyes sharp as knives. "How did you know? Know what? Know what you're planning?" Kyle tilted his head, smiling as if nothing mattered. "Kid, once your eyes stop just carrying marine justice and start asking what is justice, your course is already set. Your face practically screams, 'I want to overthrow this rotten world.' Is it that hard to see?" Dragon was left speechless. He felt exposed, like a naked child in front of Kyle, every thought, every pretense seen through in an instant. The sensation was unbearable. He finally gave up resisting, letting Kyle pull him along. What exactly did you want to say by coming after me?" he asked. "You were looking for me?" Kyle laughed as if he'd heard the funniest thing. "Get it straight, you were following me." He let the teasing trail off and studied Dragon's young face. It was drawn and tight, weighed down by something Kyle couldn't name, and he felt an odd twinge of pity. The bright kid who used to tail Garp, clear-eyed, all fire and promise, how had he become this sweat-soaked bundle of misery and bitter grudges? Poor kid, look how worried he is. All right. Kyle waved him off, then hooked an arm around Dragon's shoulders and steered him down a narrow alley toward the town center. "Come on, have a drink with me." "It's on me." What I? A once promising Marine hotshot, and now a dangerous man wanted by the world government, can't even afford a drink. Kyle shot him a sidelong grin. Dragon was quiet for a beat, then fell in step behind Kyle. They pushed into the rowdiest tavern in town. Noise hit them like a wave, shouts and laughter, the thick mingle of alcohol, sweat, and roasting meat. Rough-looking pirates and townsfolk linked arms at battered tables, shouting boasts, playing finger-guessing games, while wooden mugs bumped and clattered. Kyle, who knew the tavern well, chose a corner table, set his naginata against the wall, and snapped his fingers toward the bar. "Barkeep, 2 barrels of your best rum and 10 pounds of roasted meat." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise and reached the bartender immediately. Within minutes, a waiter hauled over 2 large barrels and a steaming platter of oily, sizzling meat. Kyle grabbed a barrel and filled the oversized wooden mug set before him and Dragon. The amber rum caught the lamplight and looked almost tempting. "Drink," he said shortly. Dragon studied his mug for a beat, then tipped it back and downed it in one go. The spicy liquor seared his throat, and a washed-out pallor on his face finally eased, color slowly returning to his cheeks. Kyle paid him no mind. He tore into the roast with greedy, messy bites, his mouth dark with grease. They didn't speak. The tavern's din folded around them like a familiar soundtrack, as mug after mug was filled and drained. Before long, a whole barrel lay empty. Dragon's tolerance for drink was obvious, but his eyes were growing more and more glazed. He didn't know why he was sitting here, drinking with a legendary pirate. He had a dozen questions he wanted to ask, about Roger, about the will of D, about the world's hidden truths, but when he opened his mouth, he couldn't find a place to begin. Kyle ate and drank until he was satisfied, belched contentedly, and wiped his mouth with a napkin. He leaned back, watching the man across from him, who sat drinking without speaking, as if trying to drown every worry in the amber liquid. At last, Kyle spoke. "So?" His voice came slow and steady. "That justice you chase, have you found the answer yet?" Dragon's mug froze halfway to his lips. Kyle's offhand question hit something deep. The tavern's cacophony fell away. The drunken ramblings of sailors, the waitress's cackling curses, the dull thud of wooden mugs colliding, all of it receded into a distant hum. Everything around him blurred. Only Kyle's face remained sharp, 3 parts amusement and 7 parts clear understanding. Dragon stared up, stunned. "You?" Dragon opened his mouth, then found he couldn't make a sound. More precisely, his voice was squeezed into an almost inaudible thread, snuffed out and smoothed by an invisible force the instant it left his throat. Kyle extended an index finger and held it to his lips in a quiet shush. A barely perceptible wave-like ripple shimmered around the fingertip. "Soundproofing barrier. Just a neat little trick," he said lightly. "Besides, the subject we're about to discuss isn't something you want that foot-picking brute at the next table overhearing." He nodded toward a pirate not far away, sprawled with his feet on the table, loudly bragging through a drunken haze about how he'd kicked an admiral, punched another, caped from impel down. The sudden, forced silence stripped away Dragon's last psychological defenses. He set his mug down. For the first time, the flames that usually burned in his eyes dimmed, replaced by deep confusion and fatigue. "I don't know," he said, his voice low and hoarse in a way he hadn't realized himself. "After I left the Marines, I traveled all over the South Sea and the West Blue," he continued. "I even slipped into a few non-aligned countries. I followed every lead I could find." He trailed off, the sentence hanging in the air, the admission of uncertainty plain in his expression. "I've seen too much, too many things that shouldn't exist in this world." Dragon kept his fists clenched under the table, knuckles white. Endless wars, blood and violence, slaves and nobles. This shouldn't be how the world is. Kyle cleared his throat awkwardly. "Don't say lines like that, kid," he thought. "I tried to fight back." Dragon went on, voice hollow. "I gathered those who felt the same, and we toppled one tyrant after another, sent those arrogant nobles to the guillotine. People called us the warriors of freedom. They looked to me as hope." He should have looked proud, but his face held only pain. But it was useless. He shook his head, as if trying to dislodge helpless memories. "We chased one king away and the world government would just install a new puppet, often worse than the last. We liberated an island and agents from the CP department would swarm in like sharks, snuffing out every spark of resistance. I felt like a child building sandcastles on the beach. No matter how fast I built them, one wave would come and wash everything away. I killed more and more people followed me, but this world, it hasn't gotten better even a little," Dragon said, lifting his head. He looked straight at Kyle with a face that mixed repressed fury, bewilderment, and a desperate question. "Mr. Kyle, you were one of the Roger Pirate's spokesmen. You reached the end of the world and saw the true history. You have to know what's wrong with this world. Why is it like this?" Kyle said nothing at first. He waited until Dragon finished, then leisurely tore a strip from a piece of roasted meat, chewed it slowly, and swallowed. He dabbed his hands with a napkin and eyed Dragon for a long moment. "That's a good question," he said at last, "but you started off in the wrong direction." "Wrong?" Dragon echoed. Kyle snorted and leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs and settling into an almost casual posture. "Do you think you're fighting kings, nobles, or the Marines?" he asked. "You haven't even understood who your real enemy is. You've been battling puppets. What good does it do to cut down the strings you can see? The one pulling them all is laughing somewhere you can't even see." He reached out, dipped a finger into the wine on the table, and let it run down his hand as if punctuating the point. Dragon drew a circle at the very top of the table. "These are the celestial dragons," he said. "They don't have to lift a finger. They just lie back and suck the life out of the whole world." Below that, he sketched a spread of circles. "These are the world government and the royal families of the various nations," he continued. "Think of them as stewards for the celestial dragons. They harvest the people's wealth, hand most of it up to their masters, and keep whatever scraps they can." He drew a straight line across the middle of the table. "These are the Marines and the Cypherpol units," he said. "They're the muscle and the security. The enforcers the stewards hire to crush anyone who won't pay the rent and to protect the master's interests." Then he swept his palm across the largest area at the bottom. "And this," he said, "is everyone else, 99% of the world's population." He met Kyle's eyes and his voice hardened. "They are the true producers. They farm and fish, build ships, mine the earth. They feed everyone above them. But what they get is the least," Kyle said. "Wah. What you're doing now is taking a small group of tenants to kill one or two vicious security guards, or to scare off a greedy housekeeper. And then what? The master hires even worse guards and replaces them with even greasier, more corrupt housekeepers. You're treating the symptoms, not the disease." Dragon's breath caught. Kyle's blunt analogy struck him like a thunderclap, slicing through the dense fog that had clouded his thinking. He had always focused on those individual, brutal people, the faces of oppression, but he had never seen it so plainly as a cold, functioning system made up of rigid classes. This is a structural problem," he whispered, feeling the ground of his worldview give way. "Correct. 10 points. Kyle snapped his fingers. "So your revolution can't be just a few armed uprisings anymore. You're not trying to topple a handful of people. You're trying to overturn an order that's been in place for hundreds of years." "What you need to fight isn't swords or guns," Kyle said. "It's an idea that's taken root in everyone's minds. The notion that the world ought to be this way." "An idea?" Dragon asked. "Yes, an idea." Kyle's smile was small but pointed. "You have to tell the tenant farmers who are being ripped off that they weren't born to be exploited. Make them see that it's not that they can't feed themselves, but that the grain they sweat to grow is stolen by the housekeepers and masters. You can't just hand them weapons. You have to give them a reason to fight. You don't merely lead them in a charge. You wake them up, make them stand on their own, and reclaim what's theirs. Your enemy isn't the world government alone. It's servility. Your weapon isn't a storm of steel, but an idea. What you need isn't just a war. It's an enlightenment. A movement to liberate thought that sweeps the world." Kyle's voice stayed quiet, but each sentence landed like a heavy hammer blow on Dragon's heart. Kyle admitted he wasn't a great man, limited in talent, selfish, and self-serving. That didn't stop him from standing on the shoulders of giants and passing the torch, though, because he had seen a better world and had, however briefly, glimpsed the future. Dragon sat frozen, forehead beaded with sweat. So that was it. He had always felt like he was stumbling alone in the dark, swinging his fists in desperation with nowhere to aim. Kyle's words hit him like a brilliant lighthouse, suddenly clearing the way ahead. Toppling tyrants was only the first and most basic step. The real revolution was a revolution of thought, teaching the oppressed to recognize their class, to understand the roots of their exploitation, and to organize consciously and collectively against an unjust order. Everything he had done before felt suddenly small, acts of a lone knight-errant. What Kyle offered was different, the path of a true revolutionary, A fierce, unprecedented enlightenment crashed through Dragon. Every nerve in his body trembled with it. Clarity flooded him, and with it a fierce, exhilarating certainty. The confusion in Dragon's eyes cleared, replaced by a hard, unprecedented resolve that seemed capable of setting the world aflame. He stared at the man before him, lounging as if nothing mattered, and felt a surge of awe and gratitude so strong it left him breathless. In the span of a single cup of wine, with only a few words, this man had erased the biggest problem that had plagued him for years and pointed him onto a broad road to true justice. Dragon opened his mouth. 1,000 things fought to be said, then boiled down to one simple sentence. I understand. Kyle, thank you. Kyle waved a hand, and the hush he'd conjured dissolved. The tavern's clamor rushed back like a tide, as if their world-changing conversation had never happened. Good. Glad you understand. He filled his glass again from the barrel, not a hint of hurry in his movements. Don't just talk about it. You're going to end up as the world government's #1 most wanted criminal. When your bounty gets high, don't forget who bought you this drin, K. He raised his glass to Dragon. Then, cheers, to this miserable little world that's about to get interesting. I don't have the chapter text yet. You only posted the line, to the future, revolutionary. Please paste the full chapter you want rewritten. A few quick questions to make sure I match your intent. Do you want American or British spelling? Keep the original narrator's voice in POV, first person, third person, etc., or feel free to modernize, adjust it. Any lines or phrases you absolutely want preserved verbatim? If the chapter is long, I can revise it in sections. Tell me if you prefer that. As a small polish example, if that line is the chapter title, here are 2 natural options. To the future, revolutionary. To the future, revolutionary. Paste the chapter, and I'll produce a coherent, idiomatic English version ready for readers. Chapter 97. Let the wind of fate guide you. Dragon's knuckles whitened around the wineglass. His eyes, which had been clouded by confusion for so long, suddenly burned with an intensity he'd never shown before, as if something deep inside him had been ignited. He stared at Kyle and opened his mouth. The plea, please join us, hovered on his lips, then died there when he saw the smile in Kyle's eyes. Hold it. Kyle seemed to read him like an open book. He lazily raised his hand, downed the last gulp of rum in his cup, and set it back on the table. I'm not interested in saving the world. It's too tiring. He slammed the huge wooden cup down with a dull thud. Kyle despised the world shaped by the world government's rule, but he wasn't driven to tear that world down. Maybe Gol D Roger felt the same. That was why, back at God Valley, he and Garp fought together to take down rocks instead of going after the celestial dragons first. Absolute power brings absolute freedom, and absolute freedom can mean either flipping the table yourself or sitting back as an amused spectator while others do the flipping. Kyle wanted only one thing, to live untethered, answerable to no flag or doctrine. I'd rather be a free little pirate than a grinding cog in the Revolutionary Army, he said. One day eating grilled fish on some island, the next watching the sunset over another sea, getting into a scrap now and then, stealing a few coins for a bottle of rum. That's living. The words could have doused Dragon like a bucket of cold water. Instead, they sharpened him. The fire in his eyes didn't die. It became clearer. Kyle's image, wild, unbound as wind and tide, made Dragon feel inexplicably lighter. He set his wineglass down with a soft clink and began to stand. But, Kyle added, dipping a finger into the wine ring on the table and idly tracing circles in the rough wood, if you're set on this, one commander alone won't do it. To start a prairie fire, you need the first batch of fools willing to shove in the kindling. Dragon fell silent, listening. Go to the Sober Kingdom in the South Sea, Kyle said, tapping the table with his fingertip. In the little church there, you'll find the help you need. Kyle's voice held a wry amusement. A big man, as kind as he is simple, and a girl as bright and quick as a flame. Tell them you want to build a world where no one goes hungry, and they'll become your strength. Dragon simply nodded. He asked no questions. He only looked at Kyle once, long and steady, committing the favor and the advice to memory. Then he stood and bowed. I understand. Without wasting words, the man who would one day lead a revolution turned to go. His trademark green cloak settled about his shoulders as he strode out of the tavern. There was no longer any trace of hesitation in his posture. Each step was sure, as if he were walking toward a new future for the land. Just as he reached the door, Kyle's casual voice called after him. "Hey, little dragon." Dragon stopped and looked back. Kyle was still reclined in his chair, one hand laid across his chest, fingers forming an odd, deliberate gesture. "Follow the guidance of the winds of fate," he said. Dragon's pupils pinched inward, as if he could see storms gathering above that hand. For the first time, a genuine, trusting smile softened his features. He copied Kyle's gesture, pressing his right hand to his chest. "Understood." Then he melted into the night of the town without another glance. After seeing Dragon off, the young man determined to give the world a little shock, Kyle fell back into his old sea loafer habits. He kept wandering. In the land of food in West Blue, he spent 3 days gorging himself on the locals' stews. He stayed a little too long at a casino, cheated a little too successfully, and ended up being chased all over half the island by David Dye, the clan elder of the Taste True tribe. In the Rubunir kingdom of North Blue, he'd heard rumors that the fabled 10,000-year ice crystal could cure any illness. He rushed there full of hope, only to discover a handsome block of ice that was good for nothing but chilling fruit juice, admittedly, very tasty fruit juice. Time is the best playwright, but it has a soft spot for tragic endings. Kyle's travel checklist kept getting longer, but the most important item on it was still unchecked. Kyle had roamed the 4 seas, but Roger's illness still showed no sign of a cure. Even the famed miracle doctors and secret potions had been reduced to jokes. Unwittingly, the calendar had turned to sea year 1498. That day, Kyle lay on the deck of a small fishing boat at the edge of the calm belt, a sprig of foxtail grass between his teeth as he idly fished. The sun was perfect, the ocean was glass, and he was so comfortable he was nearly dozing. Brr, brr, brr. Click. The little golden den mushi at his waist, quiet for a long time, suddenly began chirping. Kyle didn't even bother to open his eyes. He slowly fished the creature out and answered, "Moshi, moshi." A deep, boisterous laugh erupted from the other end, loud enough to split the air. "Kuha, Kyle, it's me!" The den mushi somehow carried the unmistakable image of the caller, a wide grin framed by a distinctive mustache. The foxtail grass fell from Kyle's mouth with a soft plop as he shot upright, all trace of laziness gone. "Roger?" "Ha ha! Who else could it be but me?" Roger's voice crackled through the den mushi, all laughter and warm mischief. "Rayleigh and I are getting plastered here at Saboti Archipelago. Where the hell have you been hiding? Get your butt over here right now." Hearing that familiar, booming voice, Kyle couldn't help grinning and muttering, "You old geezer. Still alive, huh?" "Bastard, I'm the Pirate King. Do you think I'd drop dead that easy?" Roger bellowed. "Less chatter. Rayleigh's about to finish off the last bottle. I'll give you half a day. If you don't show up, next time I see you, I'll tie you to the bow as a ram." Kacha. The den mushi clicked off. Kyle held it for a beat, stunned, then laughed helplessly. He stood up, stretched and cracked his knuckles and joints. "They really don't give the young folks any mercy," he said to himself. Then, without warning, the sea under his feet seemed to collapse. The water dropped away into a sudden, yawning hollow, and in the next instant, columns of seawater exploded upward and outward with a deafening boom. A terrifying circular shockwave rolled outward from the fishing boat, hurling the little vessel forward. It tore across the calm sea, racing toward the designated meeting point. Behind them, a long white wake stretched to the horizon. 98. Roger's decision. Saboti Archipelago. Sunlight filtered through the massive branches and leaves of the Yorakumin mangrove, throwing dappled patterns across the lush grass. Dreamlike, iridescent bubbles drifted through the air, catching color and light as they rose and silently popped. On this secluded island, away from the bustle, 2 men lounged against the roots of a giant tree, idly drinking. Several empty bottles lay scattered on the grass. Roger held a bottle, tilting his head back and draining the last of it. His Adam's apple bobbed with each gulp. The drool ran from the corner of his mouth and darkened the front of his pink shirt. Beside him, Rayleigh sat far more composed, a single wineglass balanced in his hand. He watched Roger's rude, exuberant drinking with an affectionate, helpless smile. "Burp!" Roger belched loudly, flicked the empty bottle aside so it clicked against a root, and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He scanned the surrounding mangrove as if searching for someone. "Hey, Rayleigh." He elbowed his first mate. "Where's Shacky? Why isn't she around?" Rayleigh's body went rigid. He shifted just enough to block Roger's view of the little bar a short walk away, face suddenly guarded. "She's busy," he said. Roger blinked at the sudden protectiveness, then snorted with amusement and bent over laughing. "Ch! I was only asking how an old friend was doing, and you act like I'm some kind of thief," he joked, wagging a finger. "My Rouge is the finest wife in the world. No one comes close." He wore that look people give when they're proudly displaying their most treasured thing. Rayleigh watched him for a moment, the wariness in his eyes softening into a warm smile. He could tell Roger meant every word. Then the smiles on both their faces slipped away at the same time. They glanced upward toward the clear blue sky. On the far horizon, a tiny white speck tore through the clouds, closing on the island with unnaturally high speed. A low, eager chuckle escaped Roger. "Coo-ha-ha! Looks like he made it." Rayleigh set his glass down and rose to his feet. The lenses of his spectacles flashed as the approaching speck grew larger and brighter. It wasn't just a white dot. A long white streak tore through the sky, as if the heavens themselves had been split in two. Riding at its leading edge was a pitifully small fishing boat. The hull groaned and shuddered from the incredible speed, but the little craft was wrapped in an invisible wave that held it steady as a rock. "That old," Rayleigh muttered, watching the boat being shoved through the air. He couldn't help the twitch at the corner of his mouth. He's getting on in years, and yet he still can't help showing off. Roger only laughed out loud, the sound bright with the pleasure of reunion. "That's exactly like him! Coo-ha!" By the time he spoke, the flying boat had reached the small island. The circular shockwave that had been pushing it suddenly dissipated into the air. Its job done. Stripped of momentum, the fishing boat arced in a graceful parabola and began to fall toward the grass. Roger and Rayleigh simply watched, not even bothering to move out of the way. Just as the hull was about to smash into the ground, Kyle stepped lightly onto the deck. Buzz! A gentle ripple radiated from the bottom of the boat, like an invisible air cushion blooming beneath it, and the craft settled down without a scratch. The little fishing boat that looked as if it might fall apart at any moment nosed gently up onto the grass. At the bow, a lone figure stood perfectly still, wind-whipped clothes settling around him. Long black hair, golden eyes, and a face set in stubborn defiance were all thrown into sharp relief by the sunlight. It was Kyle. He glanced toward the shore, a faint frown tugging at his mouth, clearly not pleased. "Sk, still too slow." His soft mutter drifted on the breeze to the shore and made Rayleigh's eye twitch. Roger only laughed louder. He jumped to his feet and waved both arms at Kyle. "Hey, Kyle, if you'd been any later, I'd have Finn issued all the booze." "You two bastards," Kyle grinned, showing 2 rows of painfully white teeth. "You didn't save a drop for me, did you?" "You scoundrel, why didn't you just bring some sea kings along for the party, too?" Roger called back with a wide, teasing grin. Roger's hand came down on Kyle's back with the kind of force that might have cracked a reef. Kyle staggered, the grass under his feet pressed down an inch or two from the impact. He grimaced, rubbing at his shoulder, then shot back a coarse comeback without missing a beat. "You two should have saved me some booze. What else was I supposed to use to entertain guests?" Kyle said, settling himself boldly between them. He grabbed an unopened bottle of rum by Roger's feet, bit the cork off with his teeth, and took a long, crude swallow. He laughed, loud and unrefined. Roger's laugh joined his. "That's right, the 3 of us. That's how it should be." Rayleigh pushed his glasses up his nose and regarded the 2 of them with an indulgent shake of his head. "Where's Jabba?" "Roger, haven't you contacted him?" Roger's grin faltered. He scratched at his messy black hair, looking genuinely bothered. "I tried, gave the Den Den Mushi a call, but it wouldn't connect. He's probably gone off to some deep-sea trench to arm wrestle sea kings again, or holed up in some godforsaken mountain forest." Kyle snorted. "Well, it's no surprise the signal's dead in a cave." The little exchange dissolved into easy laughter, and the warm, familiar looseness of old comrades reunited. For a few hours they sank into the same rhythm they'd known for years, drinking and swapping stories on deck, by a campfire, even in enemy territory, just the 3 of them. comfortable and at ease. Sunlight sifted through the leaves of the Urukiman mangrove, painting everything in a warm golden glow. For a moment, it felt as if time itself had paused. After a round of laughter and boisterous talk, Roger suddenly fell quiet. He folded his legs beneath him, and the easy smile that usually lived on his face drained away, replaced by a calm the likes of which none of them had ever seen. He reached for a fresh bottle of wine, but instead of downing it the way he often did, he poured himself a glass slowly, deliberately. He filled Rayleigh's and Kyle's cups as well. The casual merriment around them cooled. An unmistakable charge of expectation settled over the circle. Whether in a crowded tavern, on a battlefield, or in the teeth of a storm, whenever Roger wore that look, it meant he was about to make a decision that could not be undone. "I've decided." His voice was low, but it carried, cutting through the rustle of leaves and the hum of insects as clearly as any shout. "I'm going to turn myself in to the Marines." The words hung in the air like a sudden drop in temperature. Kyle's hand froze with the bottle halfway to his mouth, the amber wine sloshing gently at the neck. Rayleigh's knuckles tightened around his glass until the veins on the back of his hand stood out. "What did you say?" Rayleigh's voice came out low, as if he were forcing something down. He wouldn't meet Roger's eyes. Instead, he stared into the wine as it swirled in his glass. The normally composed, gentle man was suddenly stone-faced, all emotion smoothed over. "Roger," he snapped. Then, as if whatever had been held back finally broke loose, he looked up. The restraint vanished. Anger and disbelief cut through him. "Do you know what you're saying? We're pirates. If we're going to die, we die at sea. What do you mean, surrender?" "This isn't surrender, Rayleigh." Roger shook his head, his expression softening as his gaze passed over his two most trusted companions. "This is the best way I can think of to end it." He let out a soft sigh, equal parts the helplessness of a man whose road was closing and the resolve of someone who refused to vanish quietly. "We've seen Laugh-Tale's answer. It isn't for this age." His voice carried a trace of wistfulness, but beneath it was a calm release. "My time is short. You both know that. Rather than sting away on some nameless sickbed and dying in silence, I won't accept such a pathetic end." He straightened, and the aura of the Pirate King surged from him like a force trying to punch a hole through the sky. "I refuse to leave so quietly." A fearless, wild smile curved his lips. "I want the whole world to hear my voice. I want my death to usher in a brand new era." Kyle fell silent. He watched Roger's face, still flushed with the last embers of life, and the discomfort and worry he had felt boiled down into a bitter, clear understanding. Roger had never been a man to bow to fate. His life had been as brilliant as summer flowers, and his death, too, would strike like a thunderclap. "I want those lost on the endless sea, confused, uncertain, afraid, to know that the end of the sea is not nothingness." Roger raised his wineglass. His eyes sparkled, as if he could already see the grand scene he spoke of. "I want to tell them I left everything in this world out there. My curtain call will be the prelude to a new era." 99. In Trust. The sun hung bright over the Sabaudi archipelago, and the resin-coated bubbles of the Urukiman mangrove shimmered like something out of a dream. But underneath the trees the air felt sucked dry, so heavy it was almost suffocating. A wind moved through the leaves, and they rustled like silent sighs. Rayleigh's fist, clenched so tightly it looked as if it might break, loosened, tightened again, and then finally fell to his side in resignation. The composed smile he usually wore had vanished, replaced by a pale, helpless despair. He knew Roger too well. Once that man decided on something, no mountain of reasons could make him turn back. Kyle said nothing. He tipped his head back and downed the last of the rum. The burning liquid scorched his throat, but it did nothing to douse the turmoil in his chest. He flung the empty bottle aside. It hit the ground with a dull thud, a sound half like a release and half like a farewell. Roger watched them both, and his smile only widened. He understood how reckless his choice was, and how cruel it would be to those closest to him, but he had made his decision. "Hey, don't make faces like you're at a funeral," Roger said with a laugh, nudging the quiet Rayleigh with his elbow. "I'm the one who's going to die, not you lot." "This isn't just about me," Roger added more slowly, his smile fading into something softer. The ones I've hurt the most in my life aren't strangers. They're you bastards who stuck by me through everything. When I die, the Roger Pirates will be nothing but history. But the world government won't let you walk away free. The Marines will chase you like sharks scenting blood. When have we ever been afraid? Rayleigh snorted. I know. Roger laughed, that familiar, wholehearted laugh full of trust and pride. But I don't want my end to be a weight you carry forever. I want you to be able to live ordinary lives if you choose. Open a little bar in some sleepy port, fall in love, or keep sailing to see the sights we never had time for. I don't want you living in the shadow of former Pirate King's crew, always hiding. He paused, then spoke each word with quiet conviction. So I'll make one last bargain with the world government. He looked each of them in the eye. I'll trade the head of Pirate King Gol D Roger for your freedom. I pardon every member of the Roger Pirates, Roger announced. From the moment I step onto the execution platform, there will be no more remnants of the Roger Pirates in this world, only a group of ordinary people who have won their freedom. The air seemed to freeze. The anger that had flared in Rayleigh's eyes blinked out, replaced by a deep, wordless shock and sorrow. He opened his mouth and could not make a sound. Kyle's hand stilled halfway to his cup, his golden eyes darkened, unreadable. Those two men looked at each other and understood the meaning behind the words. That bastard, selfish, reckless as always, was still thinking of them, even now. Roger saw the change on their faces, and a lightness returned to him. The weight that had been on his features melted away, and he slipped back into his usual, easy grin as if he hadn't just spoken of his own death. Kuhaha! Don't look so mournful. This is good news. He clapped both of them hard on the shoulders. By the way, there's something I haven't told you yet. He leaned in with a mischievous grin, flashing a mouthful of white teeth. I'm going to be a father. What? Kyle and Rayleigh exclaimed at the same time, turning to him in stunned, disbelieving surprise. Kuhaha! Surprised, aren't you? Roger crowed, throwing his chest out and beaming. All right, you two are getting a promotion. Rayleigh, you'll be the kid's elder uncle. That bastard Jabba can be third uncle. And you, Kyle. Roger jabbed a finger at Kyle with a triumphant grin. You'll be fourth uncle. How's that for seniority? Happy? Rayleigh froze for a moment, then let out a crooked, relieved smile. Kyle, on the other hand, went pale and insulted. Fourth uncle? Why am I after Jabba? I was the third Pat to sign onto the ship. Fourth uncle. It sounded ridiculous to him, unlucky even. He could already imagine the ribbing, people sneering. Look who's come to see his big nephew, the fourth uncle. The sort of mock salutations that made the title a joke. Even the memory of some idiot like Judy being labeled fourth uncle made his teeth grind. Because you're the youngest, Roger laughed, wagging a finger as if scolding a child. The room filled with a ripple of laughter at Kyle's expense. The laughter faded. Kyle's face hardened, as if a thought had finally settled into place. He stared at Roger, eyes narrowed, and asked the one question that mattered most. Then who are you going to entrust Rouge and the child to? The question hung in the air, heavy as an anchor. The Pirate King's widow and his bloodline, wherever they were hidden, would be the world government's top target until they were wiped out. Rayleigh's smile dropped. He looked at Roger with a seriousness that matched the weight of the words. Whoever Roger chose, him, Jabba, or a shared responsibility, Rayleigh was ready to guard them with his life. And no, he wouldn't be the type to sit back with a drink and watch their execution. Roger scratched his head, an expression of casual annoyance on his face, and spoke a name that made the room go quiet all over again. Oh, that! I've already asked Garp. Silence stretched. 1 second. 2. Then, huh? Kyle sprang to his feet, outraged. You're leaving the child with that fool Garp? The one whose mind is full of throwing cannonballs and eating senbai. He began pacing, voice rising. Even if Rayleigh's getting old and half-blind and Jabba's brain is nothing but fight and muscles, what about me? Why can't I be the one to take care of them? Kyle grew more agitated as he spoke, hands on his hips, his face saying plainly, You're being unreasonable. Look at them. Who raised those two brats, Shanks and Buggy? Under my guidance, they turned out upright and strong. One's going to be a great swordsman, the other's particularly lucky. He hesitated a moment, then added, a little grudgingly, I mean, Buggy isn't terrible. I've got plenty of experience. Why wouldn't you entrust the kid to me? Rayleigh's eye twitched as he listened. He pushed his glasses up silently. Roger watched Kyle's frustrated, genuinely wounded expression about the whole who gets to look after them issue, and after a moment of stunned silence, he burst into booming laughter. Kuhaha, you actually want to be a nanny dad that badly? This isn't about wanting it. Kyle's face flushed with anger. This is an insult to my teaching ability. It's a denial of my character. Rayleigh shook his head helplessly at Kyle's exasperated, almost childlike display, but he couldn't help the faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Kyle never really cared about the title of Master Teacher. What ate at him was the idea of being left out of Roger's last entrustment. He laughed for a long time, then watched as Roger gradually stopped. Roger wiped the corners of his eyes, and his smile softened until it was almost luminous. He looked at the younger brother who had grown up beside him, who had traveled the world seeking a cure for his illness, and who was now furious over a simple matter of succession. The fire that usually burned in Roger's eyes was gone. Warmth filled them instead. Kyle. Roger's voice had lost its boom and taken on an unfamiliar gentleness, calm as a slow tide. The Pirate King's younger brother is free. Those words unmade every question, every surge of anger and refusal inside Kyle. He stood unmoving, staring as Roger's gentle, unshakable face reflected in his golden pupils. Rayleigh can retire and watch a new generation rise. Jabba can keep training and dare depths he has never sailed, Roger went on. After I'm gone, their lives can begin again. He let the final phrase hang between them, soft and indulgent. You too. If you take my child, Roger said, from that moment on your name will be tied to the pirate, King's bloodline. You'll become a thorn in the world government's side. You won't be able to go where you please. You won't be able to act without looking over your shoulder. Your life will be chained to that identity. I traded my life for your freedom, and your freedom is what I want to protect most. Roger pulled his hand back and grinned, a smile that could have dimmed the sun. Kyle stayed frozen, rooted to the spot. Something hot swelled behind his eyes, making them ache. You self-important bastard. He forced himself not to let the burning spill over, only managing a muffled curse through clenched teeth. The sunlight felt unbearably bright. Chapter 100, World Attention Time slid by like a quiet ocean current. A few months later, the world government honored the shadowy agreement. Overnight, the bounty posters of the Roger Pirates were quietly removed from wanted boards across the globe, as if that legendary crew, the ones who had tormented the Marines for decades, had never existed. In their place came a single, world-shaking announcement. Gol D. Roger, the Pirate King, has been captured and will be publicly executed in his hometown of Logatown, East Blue. A newsbird cried and dropped a paper at Kyle's feet. He didn't pick it up right away. He watched it flutter in the wind. The headline, printed in huge, stark black type, screamed the news. Beneath it, Roger's grinning bounty photo stared up from the page. Kyle finally stooped and retrieved the paper. The deal had been done. His fingers whitened around the edges as he gripped the sheet. The paper creaked under the pressure. The announcement that the Pirate King would be executed was like a boulder thrown into the ocean. It sent monstrous waves racing across the world, stirring every sea from the New World to the decks of the Moby Dick. The air on deck was thick and still. Whitebeard, Edward Newgate, sat in his usual place, a massive sake bowl empty at his feet. He held a newspaper in one hand, Roger's grinning, wild face staring up from the page, and he did not speak for a long time. Pops, Marco said softly, watching him with concern. Whitebeard let out a low, rumbling laugh that carried no joy, the kind of sound a hero of one age makes when he sees the last embers of another flickering out. That man always did love a grand finale, he muttered. He tipped his chin toward the distant sky, his gaze drifting far beyond the ship. Roger, I know what you're trying to do. It's just, to go out like this feels almost too predictable. Far away in the North Blue, at a place called Spider Miles, another pair of eyes were on the same paper. A blond man in a pink feathered coat and dark sunglasses lounged in a high-backed chair, one leg thrown over the other. Around his feet lay several of his beaten, half-conscious men. He flipped the page with a lazy hand and let out a soft, serpentine chuckle. Foo-foo-foo-foo. Don Quixote Doflamingo's smile was all defiance as he studied the image. So the old monsters of the era are finally stepping down? What a dull way for it to end, Doflamingo murmured, amusement curling in the corners of his mouth. Tripsticky, obsequious, leaned close and jabbed, "Hey, Doffy, the Pirate King's era is over now." Doflamingo's grin widened into an exaggerated arc, his eyes bright with a dangerous, feverish light. "No, Triball," he said softly. "It's not an end, it's a beginning. A truly chaotic, truly fascinating new era, one ruled by us, is about to begin. Foo. In an underground casino, a young crocodile lounged on a sofa, a cigar pinned to his lips as smoke curled around him. He skimmed the newsprint with a cold, contemptuous smile. "Humph," he said to himself. "So that's what people call kings. Rather than die in some grand spectacle, it's better to stay hidden and pull the strings." He flicked ash from the cigar, eyes gleaming with ruthless calculation. Power only lasts when it's kept in your own hands. On Kurigana Island in the West Blue, a young man with hawk-like eyes ran a black blade through the air. His casual sword strokes gouged deep furrows into the earth. During a break in his training, a carrier bird fluttered past and dropped a newspaper at his feet. Hawkeye Myhawk glanced at the page once, then tossed it aside as if it were nothing. "Pirate King," he murmured, tasting the title like something dangerous and beautiful. His eyes showed neither reverence nor fear, only a pure, hungry interest in strength. He tightened his grip on the black blade at his side and watched the horizon as though it were a rival. Grand Line, Thriller Bark. Gecko Mariah strode among his crew, their spirits high. When he heard the news, he threw back his head and laughed. "Ed, Kishishishi. The man to surpass the Pirate King," he declared, as if daring the world to disagree. A quiet port on some unnamed island. A young man in a green cloak, a tattoo etched on his face, stood without moving and watched as ships put out to sea. The newspaper in his hand whispered in the salt breeze. His expression betrayed no joy and no grief, only the sober calm of someone waiting for a storm to break. "He's lighting the flames of an era," he said under his breath, eyes fixed on the distant line where sea met sky. "Roger, where will this push of yours lead the world? Rebirth, or deeper chaos?" New world, a palace on a sky island. A blond man with a towering topknot and a ship's rudder driven through his head read the same paper, and the violent burst of hockey that followed made the whole hall tremble. "Roger!" he roared. "You bastard!" Shiki the Golden Lion shouted, crushing the wineglass in his fist. Crystal shards cut his palm, but he barely noticed. Rage and disbelief cracked his voice. "Caught by those useless Marines? What a joke! If I die, it should be by my own hand. I'll ask Roger myself, what the hell is going on?" he spat, as if the Pirate King were still there to answer him. Across the seas, the moment drew eyes from every corner of the world. Ambitious men and women, powerful figures, and schemers all turned to that little East Blue town, Logtown. They waited and watched, some to witness the end of a legend, others to mourn, but most with naked greed. A throne was about to be vacated, opportunity smelled like blood. In a quieter room, Kyle balled the newspaper into a fist and tossed it into the hearth. The orange flames hungrily consumed the page, devouring Roger's smiling face until it was nothing but ash. He remembered the final charge Roger had left behind, the nephew he'd never met but somehow felt he already knew, and Roger's calm, matter-of-fact look when he'd asked Garp to see it done. Kyle trusted neither the world government nor the high and mighty celestial dragons to carry out that promise. To them, the Pirate King's bloodline was a poison that had to be wiped from the world. Kyle knew how it would play out. After Roger died, the Marines' intelligence arm would fan out like rabid hounds, hunting down any women or newborns with even the slightest claim to his blood. They would issue orders in the name of justice, so cruel there would be no question of mercy. They'd rather kill 1,000 innocents than let one guilty person slip through. Batlarilla Island, the South Sea home of Aunt Rouge, would be one of the first places to suffer that purge. Marine officers and CP agents would go house to house, interrogating people, eyeing every pregnant stomach with cold scrutiny, holding knives to every newborn's throat. Pregnant women and infants would be slaughtered without discrimination. Garp, old, loyal, and upright, might mean well, but he was only a Marine hero. Could he save one? 10? Could he stand against the full desperate will of the world government? No, he couldn't stop them. Kyle rose abruptly. The bonfire snapped and hissed, the flames throwing shifting light over his face and the turmoil in his eyes. Roger had died for freedom. He wasn't the sort of man who would have wanted his brother to hide in some forgotten corner of the world, watching his wife and child slaughtered while a human tragedy played out before him. That thought hardened something in Kyle. A golden light seemed to swell behind his eyes. Good. If all eyes in the world were fixed on the East Blue, then the defenses at Marineford would be stretched thinner than usual. That meant the world government and the Marines could be given something far more urgent to deal with. He would start something so big it would throw them into chaos, something that would draw every available hand away from a tiny, remote island in the South Sea. Roger had used his death to spark a new era. Kyle would honor him by ensuring it burned brighter. As the Pirate King's brother, at the very opening of that era, he would give the grandest possible salute to the king's passing. He pushed off the ground. The earth thrummed under his foot, and in an instant his body blurred into a white streak of air that tore into the sky. His destination was the fortress at the end of the first half of the Grand Line. Absolute justice, Marineford.